Chapter 3505. The general trend is already set, and no one can change it? Jiang Tianyi muttered to himself as a cold smile appeared on his face. He did not refute, but he did not agree either. The moment he stepped into the spatial door and entered God's guide grotto heaven, he closed his eyes. He muttered in his heart, "If this eternal night is like a long night, there will definitely be a star that dispels the darkness. And that most dazzling star will definitely be him." Although Jiang Tianyi did not understand why he was so determined and where his confidence came from, but he still firmly believed in it. Moreover, he believed that day would not be too far away. He would definitely see it. South of God's guide grotto heaven, about 1,000,000 miles away, the sword of burial of heaven was flying through the vast sea of clouds. The world in the sword had already expanded 100 times compared to before, becoming a vast and boundless world. The Earth Spirit clan had multiplied to its peak, with a population of more than 300,000, temporarily dominating this world. In the endless mountains and rivers, there were also hundreds of millions of birds and beasts living. Ji Tianxing stood in the clouds, overlooking the mountains and rivers for thousands of miles, his expression neither sad nor happy. Burial of heaven, keep going south. We have to leave the boundless heaven continent as soon as possible. He did not speak, but used his soul to send a voice transmission to Burial of Heaven. Burial of Heaven immediately responded, his deep voice ringing in his mind. "Actually, you don't have to expose your identity so early. We can continue to lie low, and there's no need to leave the boundless heaven continent in such a hurry." Ji Tianxing shook his head and said calmly, "The decisive battle with the Azura God Emperor and revenge against the 5 emperors is something that I have to do sooner or later. Although my strength is not there yet, and the time is not ripe, I have to prepare beforehand. At least before the decisive battle, I have to build momentum in advance." Burial of Heaven pondered for a moment, then asked, "You know, with our meager strength, it's impossible for us to take revenge. So, you want to use external forces to build your own force. You don't care about ordinary forces, so your target is the various ancient clans?" Ji Tianxing nodded and explained, "How would ordinary people dare to resist the rule of the 5 emperors? Only 108. No, that's not right. There aren't that many anymore. Only the great ancient clans have the courage and qualifications to resist the 5 emperors." Burial of Heaven was silent for a moment before saying, "Back then, you went to all the grotto heavens and almost crushed all the ancient clans. Now that even the Jiang clan is unwilling to help you, how can those ancient clans who have a grudge against you help you fight against the 5 emperors?" Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a meaningful smile as he said, "Burial of Heaven, you don't understand the human heart. If the 5 emperors did not rule over the God realm, the various ancient clans would not have been able to unite. Because they were all very proud. They would be like before, each doing their own thing, like a plate of loose sand, fighting for power and profit. However, when the era of the 5 emperors arrived, they could only abandon their former enmity and form an alliance. Even though there were a few factions among them that had completely sided with the 5 monarchs. However, most of the ancient clans still stood against the 5 emperors. They didn't agree with or accept the rule of the 5 emperors. Burial of Heaven continued the conversation and said, "I roughly understand what you mean. The conflict between the ancient clans and the 5 emperors was only temporarily suppressed and did not really disappear. At present, the various ancient clans pretended to obey the 5 emperors in order to preserve their strength and did not join forces to resist. However, when their conflict intensifies to a certain extent, or when someone takes the lead to rebel against the 5 emperors and gives them hope, they will also rebel against the 5 emperors without hesitation?" Ji Tianxing nodded and said with a smile, "That's right. Before the appearance of the 5 emperors, the ancient clans stood at the peak of the God realm for tens of thousands of years. Nobility and arrogance flowed in their bones and blood. They would never agree with or allow anyone to be above them. However, the current situation was complicated. The 5 emperors had reached the peak of the divine Tao and firmly controlled the God realm. The ancient clans did not have the ability to resist, so they could only bide their time and keep a low profile. No one was willing to be the first to be eliminated by the 5 emperors. Most of them were trying their best to develop and increase their strength. Once the time was ripe, or if there was a true powerhouse leading them, they would no longer hold back. They would definitely join forces to overthrow the 5 emperors' rule. Hearing Ji Tianqing's words, Burial of Heaven roughly understood the current situation. It was still his plan. Therefore, you're that powerhouse who can lead the ancient clans to resist the 5 emperors' rule. Although your current strength is still insufficient and can't meet the 5 emperors face to face yet. But you exposing your identity this time is to let the ancient clans of the boundless heaven continent know that you're back. Even if your strength is still not powerful enough, those ancient clans will endure and wait when they see hope. There will come a day when your strength is strong enough, they will follow you and rise in revolt. Ji Tianqing nodded with a faint smile and said, "That's right. I want to convey a signal to the ancient clans. That Kenshin who once suppressed the 5 emperors and stood at the peak of the god realm has returned. As long as they don't admit defeat and don't resign themselves to fate and wait patiently, light will eventually come." Many ancient clans had been oppressed for 1,000 years and couldn't see hope. Many people's wills were wavering. Some people were wavering, not knowing whether to resist the Azura God Emperor's rule. Because they felt that the Azura God Emperor didn't attack the ancient clans, they were safe. There were also people who went with the flow and felt that they were powerless to reverse the situation, so they accepted the Azura God Emperor's rule and willingly became his lackeys. For example, by phone. So, I can't drag it on any longer. If I drag it on for a few decades or a few centuries, who knows if more ancient clans will completely submit to the 5 emperors and swear loyalty to them. Burial of Heaven was silent. It understood Ji Tianqing's worries and concerns, and also felt that Ji Tianqing's actions were understandable. However, it still gave Ji Tianqing a reminder. But you exposed your identity in advance and will definitely be hunted down by the entire boundless heaven continent. Forget about those patrol envoys, they weren't worth mentioning. If a peak divine king makes a move, or the Azura God Emperor appears, how will you deal with it? Ji Tianqing revealed a confident smile and said, "After staying in the boundless heaven continent for a few years, I've long investigated clearly. Ever since the Azura God Emperor ascended the throne and controlled the entire continent, he never appeared again. What does this mean? It means that the 5 of them relied on half of the heaven-punishing array to break through the Divine King realm and reach the God Emperor realm. But they just reached the God Emperor realm and urgently need to consolidate their strength realm. In this 1,000 years, the Azura God Emperor must have been cultivating in seclusion. Even if I blew the matter up this time, only a Inspector Deputy Commander came forward and there was no news about the Azura God Emperor. This proves that my guess is right. Therefore, the Azura God Emperor might not know that I'm back. As long as we leave the boundless heaven continent as soon as possible, there won't be any danger." Chapter 3506. After communicating with Ji Tianqing, Burial of Heaven realized that its worries were unnecessary. Ji Tianqing's exposure of his identity was not accidental, but intentional. His revenge plan had already begun in advance. Blowing the matter up and letting the ancient clans know about it was only an important step in his plan. Burial of Heaven wanted to know what his next plan was. After leaving the boundless heaven continent, where do you plan to go? Back to the primal chaos continent? After all, your old subordinates were all on that continent. If they were not purged, they should still follow you. Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and replied, "After leaving the boundless heaven continent, I will continue south and will first pass by the reincarnation island. If I can open the passage between the 2 worlds, I want to go to the dragon realm to find Wuhan. If I can't open it, I will go to the primal chaos continent to find my old subordinates." Burial of Heaven agreed. "That's good too. You have already ascended to the God realm for almost 10 years. You should go to the dragon realm to find your son." Ji Tianqing was silent for a moment and reminded it, "Burial of Heaven, just keep flying south. I have to enter the God Pagoda, so I will be delayed for a while. Shadow Executioner's flying divine artifact has been following behind us. Looking at his posture, he should only be following us and doesn't dare to intercept us. I reckon that he should have informed the patrol commander." The patrol commander will definitely order the various regions to gather countless god kings to intercept and kill us. So, just act according to the circumstances. Burial of Heaven responded, indicating that there was no problem. Ji Tianxing did not say anything else and disappeared into the sky in a flash. He hid in a desolate mountain range, took out the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda, and entered the distorted space. The blood flame's sacred tree had been growing, reaching a height of about 18,000 feet and covering a radius of 20,000 miles. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others were diligently cultivating under the sacred tree, desperately improving their strength. What made Ji Tianxing rejoice was that Ji Ku had reached the peak of the God Monarch realm and was in the process of breaking through to the God King realm. Even though this process was very long and difficult. In fact, Ji Ku would fail many times. However, Ji Tianxing believed that she would be able to smoothly break through to the Divine King realm after obtaining the inheritance of the Divine Phoenix. As for Yun Yao's situation, it was still not optimistic. Before finding the 7th Divine Bead, she would never be able to break through to the God King realm. However, she was not discouraged. She continued to strengthen her foundation and improve her strength. Ji Tianxing discovered that she was currently exploring the limits of the Divine Lord realm. Her current strength was equivalent to 10 times of a peak Divine Lord. Moreover, she was still slowly improving and strengthening. Ji Tianxing understood that the deeper her foundation was, the stronger she would be when she broke through to the God King realm in the future. Just like him, most of the time, he would be strengthened to 99 times. Once he broke through to a higher realm, he would be able to sweep through everyone in the same realm as him, and even defeat those who were stronger than him. In addition, there was another piece of news that comforted him. Yang had been cultivating in seclusion for so long. Not only had his injuries healed, his strength had also broken through to the 5th level of the Divine King realm. White Dragon, Black Dragon, and Qian Yu had also reached the 9th level of the Divine Lord realm. Only his daughter, Wu Shuang, was weaker. She had just reached the 8th level of the Divine Lord realm not long ago. Even so, Ji Tianxing was still rather pleased. He flew around the blood flame's sacred tree. After checking on everyone's situation, he sat down cross-legged. Then, he closed his eyes and began to do something very important. Sush. His godhead left his mind and flew into Kenshin's tomb in his body. Ever since he ascended to the divine world, he had not entered Kenshin's tomb once in the past 10 years. Because he knew very well what was inside Kenshin's tomb and what could be used. Now, he felt that the time was right. There was something that he had to find the answer to. Sush. Ji Tianxing's godhead became his avatar and flew across the dark and cold wasteland. A moment later, he arrived at a corner of the wasteland. The wasteland in front of him was shrouded in a boundless chaotic fog. There was a small empty area. The ground was covered with mysterious and profound formation patterns. Without a doubt, that was the heaven-punishing formation. A long time ago, Ji Tianxing uncovered a small part of the fog and comprehended the great Tao from the heaven-punishing formation. Therefore, he created the heaven-punishing sword formation and the heaven-punishing divine art. But now, he had encountered a bottleneck in his cultivation. Whether it was the heaven-punishing sword formation or the heaven-punishing divine art, it was very difficult to improve. Therefore, he could only remove the fog and observe more of the heaven-punishing formation. Gazing at the fog within a radius of 100,000 miles, Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a smile. He murmured, "In the past, I was weak and could not see the edge of the chaotic fog. Even if I used all my strength and used the 9 moves of Burial of Heaven, I could only break a corner of the fog. Now, it seems that the heaven-punishing formation I see is only 1% of the entire formation." Finished talking, he formed sword seals with both hands and released resplendent sword lights that filled the sky with all his strength, slashing towards the chaotic fog in front of him. Sush, fusush. 99 streaks of resplendent sword lights erupted with the most powerful power. They slashed down on the fog one after another, wreaking havoc everywhere. Very soon, the chaotic fog in front of him was dispelled in large amounts. Originally, the fog area that he broke open in the past was only a radius of 1,000 miles. But after 100 breaths of time, the empty area that was removed expanded to a radius of 20,000 miles. It expanded a full 20 times. Compared to the entire heaven-punishing formation, there was already 20% of the area that was clearly presented before Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing looked at the newly opened empty area. His eyes stared at the billions of formation patterns on the ground and revealed a gratified smile. After I comprehend this 20% of the formation, the heaven-punishing divine art will be able to deduce another 2 levels. The heaven-punishing sword formation's power will also increase explosively several times. 4th level Divine King Realm, middle level Divine King. I'll be able to reach it very soon. After muttering to himself, he abandoned all distracting thoughts and started to observe the formation patterns on the ground, memorizing it in his heart. Time flew by quickly. The dark and cold wasteland was eerily silent. Ji Tianxing was like a stone statue. He stood in the sky and looked down at the formation pattern that was 20,000 miles in radius. He focused on observing and studying it. After 3 months, he finally memorized the formation pattern that was 20,000 miles in radius. After all, there were more than 300 million formation patterns in this area, and they contained hundreds of millions of variations. If an ordinary lower divine king were to observe for 2 to 3 years, he might not be able to remember all of it. Sush. After Ji Tianxing memorized the formation pattern, he left Kenshin's tomb and the godhead returned to his body. He sat under the sacred tree and started to study and comprehend the heaven-punishing formation. He improved the heaven-punishing sword formation and deduced the 4th level of the heaven-punishing divine art. He was now in the advanced 3rd level Divine King realm. The cultivation technique that he was cultivating was the 3rd level of the heaven-punishing divine art. In the past, he could not deduce the 4th level of the cultivation technique, and his strength improved very slowly. But it was different now. He already had the outline of the 4th level of the cultivation technique in his mind. The 3rd level of the heaven-punishing divine art was finally completed and close to perfection. In the process of his seclusion, his strength had unknowingly increased. Chapter 3507. Ji Tianxing's guess was not wrong. For an entire month, Shadow Executioner Divine Envoy's void-piercing hairpin had been following behind the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Both sides always maintained a distance of 10,000 miles. The void-piercing hairpin would not follow too closely, nor did it have the intention of intercepting the Sword of Burial of Heaven. The situation was just as Ji Tianxing expected. Shadow Executioner Divine Envoy and the rest were just following him, as long as they were not shaken off. The other 21 Divine King powerhouses were riding on the Azure Domain Lord's divine warship, chasing all the way. At the same time, the inspector's deputy commander, Jin Shuang, also brought 7 inspectors and was rushing over at the fastest speed. Moreover, Jin Shuang also sent orders to the various southern domains, ordering many domain lords and divine kings to head to the Tiannan region to intercept Ji Tianxing. Because everyone expected it, the Sword of Burial of Heaven flew all the way south. It was bound to pass through the Tiannan region at the southernmost tip of the boundless heaven continent, and then escape into the endless sky sea. Once Ji Tianxing escaped from the boundless heaven continent, it would be too difficult to catch him again. In short, after Jin Shuang learned of Ji Tianxing's true identity, she used all her strength to weave an inescapable net, vowing to capture Ji Tianxing. Once Ji Tianxing was caught and handed over to the Azura God Emperor, it would definitely be a great contribution. Therefore, Jin Shuang was determined to win, and the location of the net was also temporarily set to be within the Tiannan region. That evening, the sun set in the west. The Sword of Burial of Heaven was flying in the middle of the Tiannan region, crossing the vast white sea of clouds. The Tiannan region was located at the southernmost tip of the boundless heaven continent. If they continued to fly south for 5 days, they would be able to leave the boundless heaven continent and enter the Xiaolong Sea area. Although the void-piercing hairpin was still following behind the Sword of Burial of Heaven, it had no intention of intercepting. But the Burial of Heaven had a rough idea and guessed that the other party might make a move. After all, it would soon leave the boundless heaven continent. If the other party did not make a move, there would be no chance. As expected, inside the void-piercing hairpin, in the dimly lit hall, the atmosphere was somewhat dull. Region Master Minglin was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the hall. He was fully focused on casting spells and controlling the sky-piercing hairpin. Qin Kong and the Tri-River Zone Lord looked at the Shadow Executioner with solemn expressions. Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner was holding a communication jade slip in his hand. This jade slip was sent by Vice Commander Jin Shuang. He had just received it. When he finished reading the information in the jade slip, he frowned with a solemn expression. Sigh, what should come will come in the end. Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner put away the communication jade slip and sighed helplessly. Qin Kong and the Three River Region Lord's hearts tightened, and they hurriedly asked, Sir Divine Envoy, was it an order from Sir Jin Shuang? What's the situation? What did Sir Jin Shuang say? Upon hearing these two sentences, even Minglin Region Master, who was controlling the space-piercing hairpin, pricked up his ears to listen. The Shadow Executioner glanced at the two domain lords and said in a low voice, It is indeed Lord Jin Shuang's order. The content is very simple. I believe you have already guessed it. Lord Jin Shuang brought a group of divine envoys and entered the South Heaven region yesterday. In addition, Lord Jin Shuang sent orders to the surrounding regions as early as a month ago. 10 domain lords and more than 10 divine king powerhouses have rushed to the South Heaven region to help and surround and kill Kenshin. Lord Jin Shuang said that the encirclement has already closed, and all the divine kings are in place. It will soon be completed, and our mission is to immediately intercept Kenshin and stall for time. When the reinforcements arrive, our mission will be completed. At that time, Lord Jin Shuang will reward us according to our merits and report it to the Imperial Tutor, Meng Shuai, and God Emperor. After hearing this, the faces of the two territorial lords changed, revealing a look of deep worry. This, as expected, although they had already guessed Jin Shuang's plan and knew that this day would come sooner or later, but now that they received Jin Shuang's order, they were still full of hesitation and fear. The Three River Region Lord frowned and smiled bitterly. Sir Divine Envoy, can we disobey? With just the few of us, intercepting Kenshin is simply courting death. The Clear Sky Region Lord also nodded and persuaded, we don't need to intercept at all. In any case, Kenshin hasn't left the South Heaven region, we can continue to follow. When the encirclement closes, the other divine kings will arrive, and everyone will attack together. Even the Minglin Region Lord, who was controlling the sky-piercing hairpin, nodded in agreement. Sir Divine Envoy, why don't you send a message to Lord Jin Shuang and ask him to consider our suggestion? The Shadow Executioner emissary also smiled bitterly and shook his head. You think too simply. If we can disobey, this emissary is also unwilling to intercept. But in fact, if we intercept Kenshin, we may have a chance of survival. But disobeying Lord Jin Shuang's order is a road to death. Moreover, Lord Jin Shuang's meaning is for us to stall for time. Only in this way can the encirclement be completed in the south of the South Heaven region. If we don't stall for time, the encirclement will be at the southernmost seaside. That's too risky. If Kenshin escapes into the Sky Sea, no one can bear this responsibility. Hearing this, the three region lords were silent. A moment later, the Clear Sky Region Lord's eyes dimmed and her tone was bitter. That is to say, we can only follow orders and there is no room for redemption? Of course. The Shadow Executioner emissary nodded, took a deep breath, and said in a solemn tone, well, everyone get ready, we should attack. As his voice fell, the Shadow Executioner emissary personally controlled the sky-piercing hairpin's divine array and accelerated forward. A white light flashed. The sky-piercing hairpin's speed suddenly doubled, crossing 50,000 miles in the blink of an eye, and appeared directly in front of the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Immediately after, the sky-piercing hairpin lit up with resplendent five-colored divine light, releasing dozens of light pillars that blasted toward the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A total of more than 30 light pillars, like thunder tearing through the sky, covered the brilliance of the setting sun, and illuminated a radius of tens of thousands of miles. Between heaven and earth, A violent aura that could destroy heaven and earth erupted, and the divine power instantly became chaotic. Many light pillars crisscrossed like a large net, and were about to cover the sword of burial of heaven. At this critical moment, the sword of burial of heaven suddenly adjusted its direction and teleported out horizontally. Sword light flashed, and the sword of burial of heaven moved 20,000 miles horizontally, avoiding the bombardment of dozens of light pillars. It adjusted its direction again and accelerated toward the south. Obviously, the sword of burial of heaven didn't want to be entangled with the sky-piercing hairpin, and just wanted to escape as soon as possible. However, the Shadow Executioner emissary and the other 3 jointly controlled the sky-piercing hairpin, and once again released 9 light blades that could split heaven and earth, slashing toward the sword of burial of heaven. The 9 sacred light blades locked onto the sword of burial of heaven, and no matter where it fled, they would catch up. The sword of burial of heaven flashed in the sky, teleported, and constantly adjusted its direction, trying to escape the pursuit of the light blades. Unfortunately, it couldn't escape in the end, and was quickly hit by several light blades. Bang, bang, bang. Muffled sounds burst out one after another, and the sword of burial of heaven was hit until light splashed everywhere. It trembled violently, and swayed as it smashed into the ground. After all, it was only a mid-grade king-level divine sword. How could it resist the pursuit of a high-grade king-level divine artifact? Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3508. Sush, sush, sush. Amidst the divine light, Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner brought along 3 domain lords and appeared in the sky. The sword of burial of heaven had just resolved the tremendous impact when it was surrounded by Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner and the rest. The 3 domain lords were all wielding divine weapons. Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner's hands were empty, but the space-piercing hairpin floated above his head. Sword God, it's time for you to die. Stop hiding and come out. Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner glared at the sword of burial of heaven and shouted coldly. The 3 domain lords were also accumulating power and waiting to take action, their bodies suffused with cold killing intent. The sword of burial of heaven did not act rashly and just guarded against the 4 powerhouses. The scene fell into silence. Both sides were silent. The sword of burial of heaven did not counterattack violently. Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner and the rest were not in a hurry either, happy to stall for time. But no one knew that the sword of burial of heaven was currently contacting Ji Tianxing in the distorted spacetime. And Ji Tianxing was still cultivating in close seclusion, working hard to consolidate his divine Dao foundation. A month passed in the divine world, and he had already cultivated for 50 months in the distorted spacetime. During this period, the heaven-punishing divine art's 3rd-level cultivation method was restored to a perfect state by him. Furthermore, he even deduced the heaven-punishing divine art's 4th-level cultivation method. His strength also rose with the tide, successfully breaking through the limit of the 3rd-level realm, reaching the 4th-level divine king realm. The current him was already a middle-level divine king long ago. Of course, after becoming a middle-level divine king, he was not in a hurry to exit seclusion and was still accumulating strength foundation. But the sword of burial of heaven awakened him. Tianxing, you guessed right. They indeed could not resist taking action to intercept. Looks like their encirclement has already formed. Many divine king powerhouses are currently rushing over. Ji Tianxing hurriedly ended cultivation and left the distorted spacetime, and asked the sword of burial of heaven, "We've already reached the Sky South region?" The sword of burial of heaven answered, "Yes. We're currently in the central region of the Sky South region. In another few days, we'll be able to leave the vast heaven continent and enter the endless sky sea." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly, the corners of his mouth hooked into a sneer, and said, "Looks like the encirclement set up by Jin Shuang is going to close the Sky South region. He will definitely not let us enter the sea, and he will not let me go." As soon as he finished speaking, he put away the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda and left the sword world. Shwa! In the next moment, a white light flashed in the sky, and Ji Tianxing appeared. With Shadow of Heaven Sky Sword, divine envoy executioner and the others with a cold divine and the others and the others. Of executors. Sky. Shadow. Shadow. Shadow shadow. For some reason, Ji Tianxing hadn't even attacked yet. His cold eyes swept across God Envoy Zhan Ying and the three region lords, and they were all frightened and trembling. Lord 2, the 2 domain, 2 domain of Lord. There was no other way. As the old saying goes, a person's name is like a tree's shadow. The 2 words Kenshin resounded like thunder, leaving a deep impression on everyone. If the crowd did not know Ji Tianxing's true identity, they would be full of contempt and ridicule and then rush forward. But they knew that Ji Tianxing was Kenshin, and their hearts were filled with fear. How could they have the slightest bit of ambition and self-confidence? Shadow of Executioner saw that the aura of the 4 of them had been completely suppressed by Ji Tianxing. If this continued, the 3 domain lords would have to retreat, and they would have to escape before the battle. Thus, Shadow of Executioner could only brace himself and shout in a low voice. Kenshin, Lord Jin Shuang is on his way, and there are more than 30 divine kings gathered in the Sky South region. This time, you can't escape even if you have wings. Even if you have great ability, you will be buried here. At this point, it's useless for you to say anything. I advise you to surrender obediently, and you might be able to save your little life. Without waiting for him to finish, Ji Tianxing raised his head and laughed. Ha, those such ridiculous words. Do you believe them yourself? Shadow of Executioner's face turned red, and he was speechless. Nonsense, even an idiot knew what would happen to Kenshin if he fell into the hands of the Azura God Emperor. Ji Tianxing said in a mocking tone, "You think I don't know what the 4 of you are trying to do? You want to stall for time and wait for reinforcements? Stop dreaming. Since you want to die, I will fulfill your wish." As his voice fell, Ji Tianxing waved the burial of heaven with all his strength and brazenly attacked. He pointed the sword in his right hand to the sky and released a vast amount of divine power, using his ultimate sword technique. In an instant, 30,000 bright stars lit up in the sky and fell like meteors. Whoosh 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 whoosh. There were 30,000 starry swords. Each of the swords was 30,000 feet long, brighter than the stars, and extremely powerful. In the blink of an eye, the 30,000 swords carried a divine power that could suppress everything and descended above everyone's heads. At this time, the area within 30,000 miles was enveloped by the sword light, and the space was also sealed. Shadow of Executioner and the 3 territorial lords' faces changed, and their eyes were filled with fear and despair. Boom, 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 boom. In the next moment, the 30,000 starry swords crashed down, and an earth-shattering explosion erupted. The mountains and rivers within 30,000 miles were instantly blasted into ruins, and smoke and dust filled the sky. Shadow of Executioner and the 3 territorial lords were also hit by the starry swords, and their bodies were covered in blood, and they were thrown out in a terrible state. Shadow of Executioner, who was stronger, dodged most of the attacks, and only took 2 hits. His left leg and back each took a hit, leaving behind deep wounds that exposed bone, and divine blood kept flowing out. The mid-king level divine armor he wore also had 2 holes in it. Compared to Shadow of Executioner, the injuries of the other 3 territorial lords were much more severe. Clearsky territorial lord's left arm had been shattered by the giant swords, and she was covered in blood and mud, lying in the ruins, wailing. Minglun and Tri-River territorial lord had also had their armors destroyed, and their limbs cut off by the giant swords, and they were screaming in pain. But this was only the beginning of a nightmare. The 30,000 starry swords did not immediately disappear after landing on the ground. Among them, 20,000 starry swords sealed the area and formed the heaven-destroying sword formation. The other 10,000 giant swords turned into a rain of swords, hurricanes, and whirlpools, and attacked Shadow of Executioner and the others. Shadow of Executioner and the 3 territorial lords were caught in the attack of the giant swords before they had time to heal their injuries. The 4 of them panicked, and hurriedly used all kinds of divine powers and supreme skills to block the attack of the giant swords. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing smiled with relief. Because he had comprehended 20% of the heaven-destroying sword formation, and not only had he deduced the more advanced heaven-destroying divine skill, but he had also improved the heaven-destroying sword formation. Now that he had used the heaven-destroying sword formation, he could summon 30,000 starry swords from outer space. Moreover, the sword formation was of a higher level than before, and its power had increased by several times. Even if he did not attack personally, he could still kill Shadow of Executioner and the 3 territorial lords by controlling the heaven-destroying sword formation. But this would take up too much time, and it would waste at least half a day. Therefore, in order to end the battle quickly, he waved the Sword of Burial of Heaven and attacked with all his might. Blade of Space-Time! Ji Tianxing shouted coldly, and he and his sword disappeared at the same time. The next moment, he held the Sword of Burial of Heaven and appeared 10,000 miles away, behind Minluan Territorial Lord. Chapter 3509. Among the 4 God Kings, Minluan Region Master was the weakest. The other 2 Region Masters and God Executioner Shadow were all 7th stage Realm God Kings. Only he was an intermediate God King. Even so, he had reached the peak of the 6th stage of the God King realm. At this moment, he was being attacked by a hurricane with a radius of 1,000 miles. This hurricane was formed by more than 2,000 star swords. Cold light flashed and the sword energy was threatening, tearing the surrounding space apart. Minluan Region Master tried his best to resist and had no time to care about anything else. When he realized that something was wrong, his divine senses detected that Ji Tianxing had appeared behind him and he was instantly terrified. Without any hesitation, he risked being shredded into pieces by the hurricane and flew forward through the sword light hurricane, just to get away from Ji Tianxing. In his opinion, Ji Tianxing was more dangerous and terrifying than the sword light hurricane. But even so, he was still one step too late. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing held the Burial of Heaven sword and stabbed out a dazzling white sword light that was thousands of feet long. The sword light was condensed to the extreme, like a real divine sword. It contained 150 types of laws and the space-time divine power was condensed to the extreme. In a quarter of an instant, the dazzling white sword light pierced through the hurricane and stabbed Minluan Region Master's back. Mingluan's armor and divine power shield were easily pierced through as if they were made of paper. The dazzling white sword light broke through Minluan Region Master's body and directly tore him into 2. Following the crisp sound of bones breaking, the 2 halves of the body flew to both sides, splattering divine blood all over the sky. Minluan Region Master didn't even have time to scream and his divine body was destroyed by Ji Tianxing's sword. Swoosh! The 2 halves of the body were still floating in the air. Minluan Region Master's divinity had already left the body and fled to the edge of the sword array in a panic. Although he knew that Kenshin was very powerful, so powerful that he could only look up to him. But he totally didn't expect Kenshin's methods to be so ruthless and decisive. It had only been a few breaths of time since the battle started and Kenshin destroyed his divine body in one move. At the same time, his battle intent disappeared and there was only one thought left in his mind. Run as far as you can, the further the better. At this moment, he did not care about the life or death of the other 3, and even threw Jin Shuang's orders to the back of his mind. Even if he ran away at the last moment and was severely punished by Jin Shuang, he did not care. He only wanted to escape from the heaven-destroying sword formation and get away from Kenshin. It was a pity. His godhead had only managed to flee 1,000 miles away when it was blocked by a vortex formed by a star sword. That whirlpool was like a bottomless abyss that ruthlessly devoured his godhead. The flying speed of the godhead instantly decreased by more than half. If he was in a deadlock with the sword light vortex for a moment, he might still have a chance to escape and not be swallowed by the vortex. But Ji Tianxing had his eyes fixed on him. Seizing the opportunity, he chased after him and brandished his sword again. Rising Dragon Slash. A golden sword ray that was 100 miles long tore through the sky like a divine dragon and slashed at Mingluan's godhead. He could only watch helplessly as the giant sword came at him, but he was unable to dodge it. Boom! Amidst the deafening sound, Mingluan's godhead was slashed open on the spot, and more than 20 fragments burst out. Each fragment shone with 5 colors and was engraved with many laws and divine patterns. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. More than 20 fragments of the godhead fell from the sky, shining with a final dazzling light. Even though Mingluan was a powerful overlord in his territory, he was still a level 6 god. After all, he was a 6th-stage realm middle-level god king. He also possessed all sorts of remarkable abilities and ultimate skills. He also had the means to destroy the heavens and earth. But all of this was not important anymore. Under Ji Tianxing's sword, he did not even last 2 moves before he was killed. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing waved his left hand and shot out a golden light that filled the sky, collecting all the fragments of the godhead into his bag. At the same time, thousands of miles away, the shadow executioner, Qin Kong, and San He witnessed Mingluan's death with their own eyes. The 3 of them also widened their eyes in shock, revealing an expression of disbelief and fear. The 2 domain lords felt their minds go blank, and their will to fight disappeared. They trembled in fear and only wanted to escape. It's too terrifying, as expected of Kenshin. Mingluan was killed by him in 2 moves. How many moves can we take? The shadow executioner was also stunned, and the fear in his heart washed over his body, causing him to tremble all over. This is impossible. Absolutely impossible. He was in a state of madness, screaming in disbelief. The last time I fought with him, although he killed Ku Yun and Xianxia, but his power was definitely not this terrifying. In just a few short months, his power actually increased by several times? What kind of monster is he? The shadow executioner's knowledge was overturned. The last time they fought, Ku Yun and Xianxia were entangled with Ji Tianxing for a long time before they were killed by Ji Tianxing. Moreover, the shadow executioner used the sky-piercing hairpin to successfully escape the seal of the heaven punishment sword array. But this time, Ji Tianxing only used 2 moves to kill Mingluan. His power had obviously increased. The shadow executioner could not help but think, this time, can my sky-piercing hairpin escape this sword array? Just as the 3 of them were in a daze, Ji Tianxing disappeared again. He teleported thousands of miles and rushed to the Tri-River Zone Lord's side, waving his sword rapidly. Hundreds of divine Dao precepts gathered in the sword radiance, and an incomparably violent divine power erupted like a flood, drowning the Tri-River Zone Lord. The Tri-River Zone Lord instantly came to his senses and desperately resisted, trying to avoid the sword radiance. As he dodged and ran, he even cried and begged Ji Tianxing for mercy. Lord Kenshin, please spare my life. However, it was all in vain. Kaboom! After an earth-shattering explosion, the Tri-River Zone Lord was also hit by the shocking sword radiance. Not only did his divine power shield collapse, but his protective armor was also shattered, and his divine body was also cut in half. There was no doubt that the Tri-River Zone Lord would follow in the footsteps of Mingluan Zone Lord. Even though he was a 7th Heaven Realm high-level divine king, his power was stronger than Mingluan Zone Lord. To Ji Tianxing, it did not make much of a difference. It was just the difference between 2 strikes and 3 strikes. Swoosh! The Tri-River Zone Lord burst out in despair and used a forbidden technique to forcibly merge the 2 halves of his divine body and desperately fled to the edge of the sword array. Ji Tianxing chased after him again, waving the burial of heaven's sword viciously. Crack! Another earth-shattering explosion. The Tri-River Zone Lord's incomplete divine body was cut into pieces on the spot, and blood splattered all over the sky. His godhead also escaped from his body and flew into the distance in horror. However, Ji Tianxing chased after him again, waving his sword fiercely. Bam! With a muffled sound, the Tri-River Zone Lord's godhead was cut into pieces by the sword radiance, and more than 20 pieces flew out. At this point, the Tri-River Zone Lord, a 7th Heaven Realm Divine King, was also killed by Ji Tianxing. Not far away, the Fairski Zone Lord was so frightened that his face turned pale, and his limbs turned cold. When he came to his senses, he turned around and desperately ran to the edge of the sword array. It was only then that he realized that Divine Envoy Shadow Executioner had already rushed to the edge of the sword array. When Ji Tianxing chased after the Tri-River Zone Lord, he had already decided to escape. Chapter 35:10. Damn bastard! What kind of divine envoy is this? He tried to persuade us to come here to die, but he ran faster than anyone else. Fairski cursed in her heart as she ran to the edge of the sword array. Ji Tianxing easily passed through the sword lights without any hindrance and caught up with her in an instant. Fairski Domain Master was filled with despair. She gritted her teeth and made a decision. She ignited her divine blood, detonated the nomological patterns on her divine spark, and used a forbidden technique. Chaotic universe! Suddenly, his whole body ignited with bloody flames, and he was surrounded by dense nomological patterns. He was like a flaming sword, and his speed increased by more than 3 times as he rushed to the edge of the sword array. Wherever he passed, the huge starry swords that filled the sky were all knocked away by him. Although his body was covered with countless wounds and blood spurted out, he seemed to be unable to feel pain and had lost his mind. He rushed to the edge of the sword array recklessly. Once this forbidden technique was used, it could increase his strength by 3 times and make him invincible. However, the price was also extremely heavy. He sacrificed 2,000 years of cultivation and 18 nomological patterns. It would take at least 3,000 years of cultivation to make up for it. However, he was forced into a desperate situation and didn't care about that anymore. What was more important than staying alive? Ji Tianxing saw Fairski Domain Master use the forbidden technique and increase her speed by 3 times, so he gave up the chase. After all, Shadow Executioner had already escaped to the edge of the sword array. He had already entered the space-piercing hairpin and attacked the sword array's barrier with all his strength. Bam! He activated the space-piercing hairpin with all his strength, and a dazzling divine light burst out. He crashed into the sword array's barrier at a speed faster than the speed of light. Amidst the muffled loud noises, the light wall of the sword formation that covered the sky trembled violently, and cracks appeared on it. The space-piercing hairpin also shook violently, and divine light burst out. Shadow Executioner was also shaken to the point that his blood was surging and he saw stars. However, when he saw the cracks on the sword array's barrier, he was immediately energized and rushed over even more desperately. Haha! No matter how much his strength increases, this sword array can't become a high-grade King Divine array. With my space-breaking hairpin, I can still break out of the sword formation. The Shadow Executioner emissary roared emotionally. He recklessly exploded with divine power, pushing the sky-piercing hairpin's power to the extreme. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing hurriedly teleported over to intercept God Emissary Zhani. Last time, I hadn't broken through yet, so you took the opportunity to escape. You want to escape this time? In your dreams? Ji Tianxing snorted coldly and waved his sword towards the sky-piercing hairpin. Sword of Destruction. He absorbed the power of the 5 elements world, gripped the sword with both hands, and fiercely slashed out a 1,000-mile-long golden sword. This sword strike had the power to split the heavens and earth, to sever space, and to destroy the world. The giant divine sword that was like a scorching sun slashed down with the power to destroy everything, causing the entire sword formation to shimmer with golden light. The Shadow Executioner forgot everything and used all his strength to activate the sky-piercing hairpin, slamming it into the light wall of the sword formation. The void-piercing hairpin was still tens of thousands of feet away from the light wall of the sword formation and was about to crash into it. At this moment, the sword of Armageddon descended from the sky and struck the sky-piercing hairpin. Kaboom! A thunderous sound that was comparable to the thunder of the 9th heaven and shook the universe exploded within the sword formation. The sky-piercing hairpin, which was flying faster than the speed of light, was hit by the giant divine sword and flew out violently. Not only did it not hit the light wall of the sword formation, but it also rolled a few hundred times, smashing hundreds of giant starry swords along the way and finally falling 5,000 miles away. When it came to a stop, the resplendent divine light on its surface had already shattered. The middle of the hairpin was deeply dented and the two ends stuck up, almost being cut in half. Fortunately, it was a superior-grade King Divine artifact, which was why it was able to survive. If it were a medial-grade King Divine artifact, it would have been cut in half or even shattered into pieces. Seeing this scene, the Fersky Domain Master was terrified and couldn't help but cry out in alarm. Oh my god! That's a superior-grade King Divine artifact. Kenshin's sword strike was so powerful? Didn't his cultivation level drop? Why is he still a high-level Divine King? Fersky Territory Lord's first reaction was that Ji Tianxing was still a high-level Divine King, which was why he could severely injure the sky-piercing hairpin with one strike. If he wasn't a high-level Divine King, no one could do it. Inside the sky-piercing hairpin, Shadow Executioner suffered a backlash. He was already bleeding from his 7 orifices and was dizzy. He was also extremely terrified. He roared in despair, "How could my space-piercing hairpin not be able to block it?" The last time they fought, Ji Tianxing couldn't do anything to the sky-piercing hairpin. He couldn't even catch up, let alone severely injure the sky-piercing hairpin. This time, Ji Tianxing's sword hit the sky-piercing hairpin and almost cut it in half. How could Shadow Executioner not be horrified? The sky-piercing hairpin was his greatest trump card and life-saving trump card. Now, his life-saving trump card was no longer useful. He also saw what happened to him. Ji Tianxing flew toward the sky-piercing hairpin with the Burial of Heaven sword in hand. He also frowned, his face gloomy as he thought to himself, "I've already broken through to a mid-level Divine King and used the Sword of World Destruction, but I still can't cut the sky-piercing hairpin? It seems that the sky-piercing hairpin is even tougher than an ordinary king-level high-level divine artifact. If one sword doesn't work, then two." This thought flashed through his mind. Ji Tianxing flew above the sky-piercing hairpin and slashed down with the sword again. Sword of World Destruction. He drew on the power of the world again and slashed out a 1,000-mile-long divine golden sword at the sky-piercing hairpin. Shadow Executioner was filled with fear and his soul almost left his body. He couldn't care less about his injuries and hurriedly controlled the divine array to escape on the sky-piercing hairpin. However, the distance between the two sides was too close. Before the sky-piercing hairpin could fly away, it was hit by the divine giant sword again. Crack! The divine giant sword still hit the middle of the sky-piercing hairpin, hitting the deep indentation with precision. This time, the sky-piercing hairpin couldn't take it anymore and was split into two on the spot. With a crisp cracking sound, the two broken parts of the sky-piercing hairpin were also thrown out in opposite directions. Mighty divine power continuously surged out of the neat cut, scattering divine stones and all kinds of debris in the sky. Even Shadow Executioner, who was hiding in the sky-piercing hairpin, was thrown out by the huge impact and tumbled across the sky. Before he could regain his balance, Ji Tianxing charged over with his sword again. "Shadow Executioner, don't even think about escaping this time." That Ji Tianxing shouted coldly and swung his sword repeatedly, splashing out dazzling sword light that covered the sky. Shadow Executioner, who was already seriously injured, could only desperately wave his divine sword and barely block. Clang, 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 clang. After a series of muffled sounds, Shadow Executioner was no match for Ji Tianxing and his divine sword was sent flying. Immediately after, he was hit more than 10 times and his body shattered into pieces on the spot, spraying blood all over the sky. After his divine body was destroyed, his divine spark fled in panic. However, the heaven-vanquishing sword array was intact, and even the sky-piercing hairpin couldn't break through it. How could his divine spark escape? After barely dodging Ji Tianxing's 2 sword strikes, his divine spark was in a desperate situation and had nowhere to run. Following Ji Tianxing's 3rd slash, his godhead finally crumbled, and was slashed into pieces that filled the sky. Chapter 35:11. The Shadow Executioner was also killed. Even though he had the sky-piercing hairpin, a superior king-grade divine artifact, he only lasted 2 more moves. Only Ji Tianxing and the clear sky domain ruler were left in the heaven-destroying sword formation. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing waved his hand and put away the divine spark fragment of the Shadow Executioner. Of course, there was also his spatial ring, king-grade divine sword, and the broken sky-piercing hairpin. To Ji Tianxing, any treasure on a divine king powerhouse's body was useful. For example, the broken sky-piercing hairpin was a superior king-grade divine artifact. He could give it to the heaven-mending pearl to devour and refine. Then, it could be converted into endless divine power to increase Ji Tianxing's strength or nourish the five-element world. This was also a gain. Ji Tianxing put away the divine spark fragment of the Shadow Executioner and looked at the clear sky domain ruler. The clear sky domain ruler was still in a state of madness. Her entire body was burning with bloody flames and surrounded by nomological divine patterns. Her strength had increased by at least 3 times. However, when she slammed into the sword formation's light wall with all her might, she only managed to crack it a few times. She was unable to break through the sword formation. She bounced back violently, blood spurting from her mouth and nose. However, she did not seem to know pain. She unleashed her full strength again and slammed into the sword formation's light wall. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing shouted, "The Shadow Executioner is dead. No one will use orders to suppress you. If you are willing to surrender and pledge your allegiance to me, I can spare your life." Ji Tianxing did have the intention of subduing the clear sky domain ruler. He was a superior divine king after all. His combat strength was stronger than Yang and Chao Qingyu. Unfortunately, the clear sky domain ruler did not appreciate it. Even if I die here, I will never pledge my allegiance to you. You are Kenshin, the Azura God Emperor's mortal enemy. Soon, you will be surrounded by dozens of divine kings and die without a burial place. If I surrender now, not only will I be buried with you, but I will also be cursed forever. At that time, not only will this prince go down in infamy, but this prince's wife, children, family, and friends will also be implicated. Sword God, you can give up on that idea. The Clearsky Domain Master's face was covered in blood as she roared in a hoarse voice. Obviously, he was determined to die and would rather die than submit. Ji Tianxing was also very helpless. He shook his head and sighed, "You're a guy who can see things clearly and see the future. Since you insist on seeking death, don't blame me for not giving you a chance." Ji Tianxing had never been an irresolute and indecisive person. Even though he had given the Clearsky Domain Master a chance to subdue her, he had not been able to do so. However, Clearsky Domain Master refused. He didn't waste any more words and directly swung the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Heavenly Dragon World / The first strike was like a divine golden dragon descending from the heavens, striking Fairsky Domain Lord with a loud bang. Bloody flames burst into the sky, and countless laws and divine runes collapsed. Fairsky Domain Master's body exploded into pieces. His weakened godhead was also flying around in the sky like a headless fly. Sword breaking 9 heavens. Ji Tianxing swung the second strike. The dazzling sword light was like the dawn that tore through the night, ruthlessly piercing Fairsky Domain Master's godhead. Crack! As a crisp cracking sound echoed out, more than 20 godhead fragments scattered in the air. Fairsky Domain Master had fallen. The battle was over. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a sky full of golden light, which wrapped around Fairsky Domain Master's godhead fragments, divine sword, and interspatial ring. The sky-vanquishing sword formation stopped operating, and everything quieted down. Ji Tianxing cleaned up the battlefield and picked up some broken king-grade divine artifacts and armor before the sky-vanquishing sword formation was complete. Swoosh! Then, he went back into the Sword of Burial of Heaven and let the Burial of Heaven continue flying south. Burial of Heaven was a little worried and asked, "Continue south? Jin Shuang and dozens of God Kings are coming from all directions. Aren't we going to change direction?" Ji Tianxing said indifferently, "You said it yourself. They are coming from all directions and there are many of them. No matter how we change direction, we will always be in the heavenly south region. We can't escape the encirclement. Rather than that, we might as well speed up and try to break through the encirclement before they close in." Burial of Heaven was speechless and could only do as he was told. In the sword world, Ji Tianxing took out the Jiutian 10 Absolutes pagoda and hurriedly entered the distorted spacetime. Time was of the essence, and he was not in the mood to check on everyone's cultivation. He hurriedly took out the spoils of the battle. 4 interspatial rings, 4 intact king-grade divine artifacts, 5 broken king-grade divine artifacts, and 1 broken king-grade high-grade divine artifact, sky-piercing hairpin. Of course, there were also hundreds of godhead fragments. Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and used the power of the heaven-mending orb. A white light vortex appeared in his palm. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, the 5 broken king-grade divine artifacts and the broken sky-piercing hairpin were all swallowed by the heaven-mending orb. Next, the heaven-mending orb would turn these king-grade divine artifacts into endless divine power. A part of it would be used to strengthen Ji Tianxing's strength, and the other part would be transferred to the 5 Elements world. Of course, after the 5 Elements world expanded and became stronger, Ji Tianxing's strength would also become stronger. It would be a pity for the 4 intact king-grade divine artifacts to be swallowed by the heaven-mending orb. Ji Tianxing decided to keep them and give them to Chao Qingyu, Yank, Lan, and Bai Long. At least, this could increase their combat strength to a certain extent. As for Yun Yao and Ji Ku's divine artifacts, Ji Tianxing would refine them himself. Next, Ji Tianxing checked the 4 interspatial rings and counted the cultivation resources inside. For hours later, he had roughly finished counting. The result was a little beyond his expectations. He originally thought that the Shadow Executioner Oracle and the 3 Territorial Lords did not have much wealth. He would be satisfied if each of them contributed hundreds of billions of divine stones at most. However, he did not expect that the 3 Territorial Lords' interspatial rings had accumulated more than 200 billion divine stones worth of resources. All kinds of divine stones, gems, divine gold, and materials were piled up into mountains. Countless divine pills, divine ability manuals, and talismans were also innumerable. There were even many king-grade, low-grade divine artifacts and divine pills in the interspatial rings. Just the interspatial rings of the 3 Territorial Lords had contributed 700 billion divine stones worth of resources to Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing thought about it carefully and felt relieved. The territories of the 3 Territorial Lords were all prosperous places in the central part of the boundless heaven continent. There were all kinds of treasures and resources. Needless to say, the Shadow Executioner Oracle. This person had a high position and was good at forming cliques. His wealth far exceeded that of ordinary Territorial Lords. The cultivation resources piled up in his interspatial ring were worth more than 300 billion divine stones. This battle made Ji Tianxing rich overnight. He had gained trillions of divine stones worth of resources out of thin air. After he counted the 4 interspatial rings, he took out a portion of the king-grade divine pills, divine artifacts, divine ability manuals, and talismans. These treasures would be useful to him and everyone in the future. As for the other cultivation resources, he only kept about 300 billion divine stones and gave the rest to the heaven-mending orb to devour. Sword breaking the 9 heavens, sword breaking the 9 heavens. Chapter 35:12. Ji Tianxing was very clear. Wanting to stabilize and increase his strength, not only did he have to raise his realm as soon as possible, he also had to nurture the 5 Elements world and let the 5 Elements world also grow rapidly. After all, he merged with the 5 Elements world into one, sharing glory and loss. After dealing with the spoils of war, only then did Ji Tianxing pick up the 100 divine spark fragments and start closed seclusion to cultivate. He used the Devour divine ability and quickly refined the divine spark fragments, selecting suitable divine Dao laws from among them, and carried out stripping and refining. Currently, he possessed 480 kinds of divine Dao laws, not far from the number of 500. Once the number of laws he grasped reached 500, there would be a qualitative leap, and his strength would definitely skyrocket. Ji Tianxing silently calculated in his heart as he refined the divine spark fragments. At most another 4 to 5 days, the burial of heaven will reach the southernmost tip of the boundless heaven continent and enter the Xiaolong Sea region. The encirclement of Jin Shuang and many divine kings should close in within 3 days and stop the burial of heaven. That is to say, I only have at most 5 months of cultivation time in the distorted space-time. Within 5 months, refining the divine spark fragments of 4 divine king powerhouses. This was a very difficult task to complete in the past. But the situation developed to this point, no matter how difficult, Ji Tianxing had to complete it. He had to increase his strength as much as possible before the encirclement closed. Although he had a conjecture and judgment in his mind, he would not be too worried about the imminent danger. But that idea was just his conjecture, he could not guarantee it 100% either. Therefore, he still had to increase his strength as much as possible, and could not entrust his safety to that idea. In nearly half a year, the boundless heaven continent was no longer calm long ago, becoming turbulent. Ever since Ji Tianxing went south all the way, killing many divine kings, domain lords, and divine envoys, his name was destined to spread throughout boundless heaven. Especially when several divine envoys gathered manpower with great fanfare, dispatching many domain lords and divine kings to surround and capture Ji Tianxing, it had long alarmed dozens of regions. Countless powerhouses were discussing animatedly, waiting with bated breath, paying attention to the situation in the heavenly south region. Many experts knew that several god envoys and a large number of god king experts would complete the encirclement in the southern heaven region and carry out the final killing blow to Tianxing. And a month ago, another piece of news that blew everyone's eyeballs out spread in the boundless heaven continent. That arrogant, domineering and lawless traitor Tianxing was actually the sword god who had fallen 1,000 years ago. Who was Kenshin? 1,000 years ago, he was publicly acknowledged as the #1 expert, a terrifying existence who had intimidated countless god kings with a single sword strike. Even though he had fallen in outer space. However, he had only been dead for 1,000 years, and his reputation was still as powerful as ever. Everyone who had heard his name knew that Kenshin had returned. Furthermore, Kenshin causing such a huge commotion in the boundless heaven continent was provoking the Azura god emperor. This was a declaration of war against the Azura god emperor. A single stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. A month ago, this shocking news had already spread wildly among countless divine king powerhouses. Especially the various major ancient clans, they were even completely stunned by this news, finding it hard to believe. However, after they came back to their senses, they all let out excited, pleasantly surprised and agitated cheers. Many people inquired about the specific information from the Jiang clan, understanding the course of events. And even more ancient clans hurriedly held emergency meetings to discuss countermeasures. In the central region of the boundless heaven continent, Divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven, inside the resplendent assembly hall. More than a dozen middle stage and above god king experts gathered together to discuss important matters. Clan leader, the various major ancient clans have all taken action upon hearing the news. Should we take action? Bai Feng's whereabouts are unknown to this day. He's definitely in Kenshin's hands. Of course we have to go and rescue Bai Feng. Why did Kenshin not kill Bai Feng? Have you all thought about it? Even 1,000 years ago, Kenshin had a relationship with our Phoenix clan too. There wasn't any deep enmity. Since Kenshin didn't kill Bai Feng, then his life isn't in danger for the time being. Everyone doesn't need to worry. Of course we have to go to the Tianan region. I agree with clan leader's decision. No matter what happens, we have to go and take a look. At the very least, we have to see with our own eyes whether Kenshin really came back to life or not. Northwest of the boundless heaven mainland. Similarly, in the assembly hall of the Fighting Grotto Heaven, more than a dozen experts of the sixth heaven of the God King realm and above gathered in the hall to discuss countermeasures. All sorts of discussions filled the hall. My fellow comrades, do you still remember Kenshin who defeated our war god clan 1,000 years ago? Of course I remember. The disciples of the war god clan will never forget what happened a few months ago. Although we don't know how Kenshin, who died 1,000 years ago, came back to life, the Jiang clan's people can confirm this. However, since the Jiang clan's people can verify this information, we can't just sit and watch. Patrol Deputy Commander Jin Shuang has gathered more than a dozen God King experts and is trying their best to kill Kenshin. Kenshin is escaping towards the south. He will probably be stopped in the Tianan region. Clan leader, everyone will follow your decision. Let's go to the Tianan region together. No matter what, we have to see with our own eyes whether Kenshin has really come back to life or not. Southeast of the Boundless Heaven mainland. Azure Grotto Heaven, in the assembly hall of the Lan clan. The same scene appeared again. More than a dozen elders, protectors, and experts of the Lan clan were discussing Kenshin. After a round of discussion, they finally decided to send 5 God King experts to the Tianan region to investigate the situation. Almost at the same time, the sect leader of the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect, Su Balian, who had not left the 100 Refinement Grotto Heaven for 1,000 years, also brought 6 God King experts and rushed towards the south. After all, the traitor Tianxing, who was also Kenshin, had the blueprint of the 100 Refinement Divine Hammer in his hands. Since it was related to the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect's divine treasure, Su Balian had to make a trip personally. Similar scenes played out in the other Grotto Heavens. More than half of the ancient clans had sent several God King experts to the south in a grandiose manner. Of course, all of this happened more than 20 days ago. Ever since Ji Tianxing killed the Shadow Executioner God Emissary, the Tianan region set off a shocking storm. Jin Shuang and the other God Kings quickly found out where the Shadow Executioner God Emissary died. From this, the God Kings also deduced Ji Tianxing's approximate location. The encirclement formed by dozens of God Kings was closing in at a faster speed. Swoosh! The sun shone brightly, and the burial of Heaven's sword sped above the clouds. In the past 3 days, the burial of Heaven's sword traveled all the way south without being intercepted by anyone. It had already reached the southern end of the Tianan region. After another day of flying, it would enter the Xiaolong region. The burial of Heaven hoped that the next day would be as peaceful as before. But it understood that this was absolutely impossible. What should come would come in the end. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Suddenly, the sky above the sea of clouds 10,000 miles to the south lit up with dazzling 5-colored divine light. At least 6 figures of God King experts appeared above the sea of clouds, forming a straight line. The burial of Heaven immediately realized that the God Kings had come to kill Kenshin. It hurriedly adjusted its direction and flew towards the southeast. However, several dazzling divine lights also lit up above the sea of clouds in the southeast. Seeing this scene, the burial of Heaven could not help but sigh. In the end, we can't avoid a decisive battle. Chapter 35:13. Back then, Kenshin was unparalleled in the God realm. The Sword of Burial of Heaven was so powerful that it didn't care about the godly kings at all. Especially those mid and high-level godly kings, they were all weak and dregs in its eyes. But that was then and this was now. Now, Ji Tianxing was only a mid-level godly king, and it was only a mid-level king artifact. Seeing a large number of godly kings blocking its way in the skies to the south and southeast, it could only turn around and flee to the southwest. Temporarily avoiding the danger and waiting for an opportunity to break out was the wisest choice. It absolutely believed that as long as Ji Tianxing was given a few more decades, he would be able to return to his peak. At that time, other than the 5 emperors, Ji Tianxing would still be the #1 godly king. However, in the southwest sky, a few dazzling divine lights also lit up and were rushing over like shooting stars. There were interceptions in all 3 directions. Burial of Heaven didn't want to be entangled with them, so it could only flee to the east, west, or north. But if it did that, it would only get further and further away from the Xiaolong region. At the critical moment, Burial of Heaven woke up Ji Tianxing, who was in seclusion while thinking of countermeasures. There are 6 godly kings directly south, 8 in the southeast, and 7 in the southwest. From the number of people and divine power fluctuations, the godly kings directly south are weaker. Thinking of this, Burial of Heaven made a prompt decision and accelerated towards the south. It had already thought it through. Even if it was injured, as long as it could break through the 6 godly kings' blockade and successfully escape into the endless sky sea, it would be worth it. Burial of Heaven pushed its power to the limit, and the blade also expanded to a length of 3,000 meters, shining with a dazzling light. The divine sword emitted an aura that could pierce through everything, and it was incomparably fierce. Like lightning, it streaked across the sky and charged towards the 6 godly kings in the south. Those 6 godly kings clearly didn't expect that the sword of Burial of Heaven would look hesitant. Not only did it not stop, but it also accelerated towards them. Damn it! It must think that we're easy to bully and wants to break through from here. Is that divine sword, Kenshin's sword, the sword of Burial of Heaven? Back then, I didn't participate in the War of the Gods, nor did I meet Kenshin. I only heard that the sword of the Burial of Heaven was unparalleled. Looking at it now, it's just as if, although we're about to meet up, we can't let our guard down. If the sword of Burial of Heaven escapes, we'll all commit suicide to atone for our sins. Don't worry. Even if we can't defeat the Kenshin, we should be able to stall the sword of Burial of Heaven. The 6 divine king experts in different attire discussed in whispers. They were all brimming with confidence. After all, they had the advantage in numbers and they were all above the 5th level of the divine king realm. In the blink of an eye, the sword of Burial of Heaven had arrived in front of him like a meteor, leaving a long trail of flames behind it. The 6 god kings no longer looked down on him as they unleashed their divine abilities with all their might to stop him. Sword cutting 100 rivers. Falling star spear. Myriad flower star rain. 8 extreme heaven sealing palm. Following a series of angry shouts, the 6 divine abilities and consummate divine abilities blasted toward the sword of Burial of Heaven at the same time. Perhaps a single god king wouldn't be able to stop the sword of Burial of Heaven. But with 6 god kings working together, the sword of Burial of Heaven instantly had a headache. Heaven Splitter Sword. It could only unleash its strongest power and use the Heaven Splitter Sword of Burial of Heaven's 9 moves to meet the divine light head-on. Boom. Crack. In the next instant, the sword of Burial of Heaven collided with the sword radiance, and palm shadows. A loud explosion that shook the 9 heavens erupted. The sword of Burial of Heaven instantly pierced through the divine technique shadows and giant palm shadows, shattering them into countless pieces. Incomparably violent shockwaves carried the divine light fragments and spread in all directions, creating a shocking storm. But it was a pity. The sword of Burial of Heaven only managed to break through 3 divine ability seals before its power was exhausted, and it flew back while tumbling. Among the 6 god kings, 3 of them were pale, and blood flowed from the corners of their mouths. Their faces were filled with shock. As expected of the sword of Burial of Heaven. Its power is terrifying. Even if that divine sword has fallen to mid-king grade, it still has such terrifying power. One can only imagine that back then. Fortunately, the 6 of us worked together and managed to stop it. Otherwise, it really would have broken out of the encirclement. The 3 injured god kings couldn't help but exclaim. The other 3 god kings didn't dare to be negligent. They hurriedly used their divine abilities and took the opportunity to attack the sword of Burial of Heaven. Swoosh, swoosh. The sword of Burial of Heaven had just dissipated the huge impact when it was engulfed by the divine technique shadows again. Bam, bam, bam. A series of muffled sounds erupted. The sword of Burial of Heaven was sent flying again, falling thousands of miles away. As a result, it was difficult for it to break out of the encirclement of the god kings, and it was even further away from the southern sea. The sword of Burial of Heaven managed to dissipate the impact with great difficulty and stabilized itself in the sky. At this moment, the 6 god kings from the south, 7 from the southwest, and 8 from the southeast all rushed forward. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 21 god kings immediately formed an encirclement, sealing off an area of thousands of miles. The sword of Burial of Heaven fell into the encirclement and had no chance of breaking out. It could only hover in the sky. Fortunately, the 21 god kings were all armed with Kenshin soldiers. They stared at the sword of Burial of Heaven with murderous intent, but they didn't have any intention of attacking. They seemed to be waiting for something. The sword of burial of heaven's consciousness swept past the God Kings, and it suddenly understood. They are waiting for the patrol deputy commander Jin Shuang. The sword of burial of heaven was naturally no stranger to Jin Shuang. During the battle in the outer realm, Jin Shuang was a capable general under the Azura God King. Many of Kenshin's followers and subordinates died tragically under Jin Shuang's cold frost divine blade. At this moment, in the northern sky, a resplendent divine light lit up, flying over as fast as a meteor. In that dazzling five-colored divine light, there were at least 8 figures. They were all God King powerhouses. Before the 8 God Kings arrived, a dignified voice filled with vigor came first. Haha. Kenshin, we meet again. This middle-aged man's voice was filled with cruelty and resentment. The sword of burial of heaven wasn't unfamiliar. That was Jin Shuang's voice. As expected, after 2 breaths of time, the dazzling divine light arrived. 8 divine king powerhouses in different attire arrived at the scene. The one leading them was Jin Shuang. He was nearly 3 meters tall, wearing a dark silver divine armor, a scarlet cloak on his shoulders, and 6 blade-like colorful wings on his back. The 7 God Kings behind him were all patrol overseers under the Azura God Emperor. Although they wore different kinds of armor and long robes, they all wore the patrol overseer's badge and token. Moreover, the strength of these 7 patrol overseers was stronger than many of the God Kings present. Only 2 of them were 6th-degree realm God Kings. The other 5 were all God Kings. And the strongest was naturally the 8th-level God King Jin Shuang. Seeing Jin Shuang and the 7 patrol overseers arrive, the 21 God Kings surrounding the sword of burial of heaven heaved a sigh of relief and bowed. Greetings, Deputy Commander, sir. Jin Shuang waved his hand to indicate that everyone was excused. His eyes were filled with resentment as he stared at the sword of burial of heaven. He laughed sinisterly. Kenshin, you can't escape even if you grow wings. Even if you hide in your shell, it's useless. Chapter 35:14. Although Jin Shuang learned from the Shadow Executioner that the traitor Tianxing was Kenshin, the Jiang clan's patriarch and elders could also confirm this point. But in fact, Jin Shuang still found it hard to believe this result. It was too strange. 1,000 years ago, he followed the Azura God King on an expedition and joined forces with the other 4 Peak God Kings to eliminate Kenshin. In the starry sky, he saw Kenshin fall and turn into ashes with his own eyes. Not to mention the god's body turning into powder, even the god's divinity turned into dregs and scattered in the void. He was definitely deader than dead. How could Jin Shuang believe that Kenshin had been reborn? If he didn't see Kenshin with his own eyes, he wouldn't believe it. The 7 God Messengers and the 21 God Kings had the same thought. Although most of them had never seen Kenshin with their own eyes. But they also didn't dare to believe that Kenshin, who was killed by the 5 emperors, could actually come back to life. Seeing the burial of heaven floating in the sky without any movement, Jin Shuang couldn't help but frown. Kenshin, you coward, do you really want me to destroy the burial of heaven and personally drag you out? Jin Shuang's patience was limited and he didn't want to waste any more time. He turned his head to look at the 7 God Messengers behind him and gave them a look. The 7 God Messengers understood and immediately took out their divine weapons. They accumulated violent divine power in their bodies and prepared to attack the burial of heaven. At this moment, the burial of heaven lit up with a white light. Swoosh! In the flickering light, Ji Tianxing, who was wearing a white robe with cloud patterns, appeared in the sky. At this moment he looked no different from 3 days ago. However, he had already been cultivating in seclusion in the distorted space-time for a full 5 months. What was gratifying was that he finally refined the 4 God Kings' divinity fragments within 150 days. At the same time that his strength increased greatly, the number of divine Tao laws that he mastered also successfully broke through 500, reaching 508. Such a terrifying number was something that only 8th-stage realm high-level God Kings could achieve. The quintessence fragments of the 4 God Kings gave Ji Tianxing a great harvest, greatly increasing his strength. In addition, The heaven-mending orb had also refined a few king-grade divine artifacts and hundreds of billions of resources, providing him and the five elements world with a huge amount of divine power. Ji Tianxing had reached the middle stage of LV4 Divine King Realm. His battle prowess had also increased by 2 times. However, he was the only one who knew all this. He stood proudly in the sky with his hands behind his back. His long hair fluttered in the wind, and his entire body exuded a majestic and domineering aura. At this moment, the world was silent. It was as if the air had frozen. The 28 divine kings and Jin Shuang all held their breaths as they stared at him. Everyone's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. All sorts of thoughts appeared in everyone's minds. It really is him, he is Kenshin. Compared to 1,000 years ago, his appearance and temperament are 80% similar. Unbelievable! Kenshin has really been reborn. Fortunately, although he is Kenshin, his strength and aura are much weaker than before. Just as everyone's expressions were different as they stared at Ji Tianxing and observed. Ji Tianxing glanced at Jin Shuang, and the corner of his mouth hooked up into a sneer. Coward? Who was the one who fled in a sorry state, crying for the Azura God King to save his life? And who was the one who, in order to save his life, made his younger brother block a fatal blow for him? At this point, Ji Tianxing shook his head and said contemptuously, Jin Shuang, 1,000 years have passed, but you are still vicious and shameless. Jin Shuang was still awe-inspiring and wanted to humiliate Kenshin in front of so many god kings. Think about it. The unparalleled Kenshin who stood at the peak of the god realm back then. Now that he had fallen to such a state, wasn't it time for him to show off? But he didn't expect that Kenshin would say his most shameful thing and poke at the eternal pain in his heart. That's right. Back then, Jin Shuang did have a younger brother from the same mother called Jinyu. The two brothers were close and their strength was not far apart. They both worked for the Azura God King. But in the battle of the gods in outer space, Jin Shuang was heavily injured by Kenshin and was almost killed by a single blow. At the critical moment, Jin Shuang tricked his younger brother Jinyu and blocked a fatal blow for him. In the end, Jin Shuang survived, but Jinyu died in outer space and turned into ashes. Because of this, Jin Shuang hated Kenshin to the bone. Jinyu's death became an eternal pain in his heart. He would never allow anyone to mention that matter, it was his taboo. But now, Ji Tianxing exposed it in front of everyone. The 20 god kings were all stunned. They looked at Jin Shuang with a subtle and strange expression. Jin Shuang was so angry that his face turned ashen. His body trembled and his whole body ignited with blood flames that soared into the sky. Kenshin, don't you dare slander me and frame me. My younger brother Jinyu died under your burial of Heaven's sword. Today, I will take revenge for my younger brother. I will cut you into 10,000 pieces. Jin Shuang would never admit the crime of tricking his younger brother to die for him. In his rage, he even forgot that his goal was to capture Kenshin alive. Everyone attack together and kill him. I want him to die. Cut his body into 10,000 pieces and grind his bones to dust. Jin Shuang pulled out his light blue frost divine blade. His face was sinister as he roared hysterically. The 7 god envoys and 21 god kings did not hesitate. They all let out angry roars and surrounded Ji Tianxing. Azure Luan flowing light sword. Dragon jade blade. Xian Bing divine fist. Heaven suppressing divine palm. Star collapse. Great mystery Dao diagram. The 28 god king powerhouses all let out loud cries. They waved all kinds of king-grade divine artifacts and released divine art light shadows that covered the sky. No one dared to be careless and underestimate the enemy. They all used all their strength and used their trump cards. After all, the strong enemy they were facing was Kenshin, who was unrivaled in the god realm back then. In an instant, the heaven and earth within 50,000 miles was illuminated by dazzling divine light. The heaven and earth divine power and space in this area also became extremely chaotic. Ji Tianxing had not made a move to counterattack. The two sides' divine arts had not collided. The extremely chaotic divine Dao law suppressed this heaven and earth into ruins. Rumble! The earth shook and the mountains shook. Tens of thousands of miles of land collapsed. The clear sky also became dark clouds as if it was night. The scene at this moment was like the end of the world. Ji Tianxing held the burial of heaven sword and stood under the divine art light that covered the sky. He was like a small boat in a stormy sea that was about to capsize. Jin Shuang held the frost divine blade and stood outside the battle circle. He looked at the lone Ji Tianxing and laughed heartily. Kenshin, back then, His Majesty the God Emperor could kill you and turn you into ashes. Today, I can also kill you once more and grind your bones to dust. You want to return to the peak and seek revenge from His Majesty the God Emperor? Dream on. Never. Chapter 35:15. For 1,000 years, Jin Shuang had always had a regret in his heart. He wanted to personally kill Kenshin and tear him to pieces to avenge his brother Jinyu. However, Kenshin was killed by the 5 emperors and turned into ashes. His regret and wish could never be fulfilled. However, Shadow Executioner God Emissary told him that Kenshin had been resurrected and his strength had weakened a lot. From that moment on, Jin Shuang's blood boiled and he was incomparably excited. He silently swore that this time, no matter what, he would fulfill his wish. And now, it was the best opportunity for him to fulfill his wish and personally kill Kenshin to avenge his brother. Looking at the sky full of divine technique light falling from the sky, Ji Tianxing was surrounded by 28 divine kings and was about to be smashed to pieces. Jin Shuang only felt incomparably happy and relieved. However, just as everyone's attacks were about to hit Ji Tianxing, instead he used an unimaginable divine ability and consummate skill. Endless sky of chaos. Ji Tianxing, who was supposed to die without a doubt, actually disappeared into thin air. Not even an afterimage was left on the spot. His entire person had merged with the heaven and earth. Although Jin Shuang and the 28 divine kings could sense his aura, he still existed in this world. But he just disappeared. That's right, he disappeared, not turned invisible. Boom. Boom boom boom. Dozens of divine techniques that could destroy heaven and earth fiercely bombarded the ground, exploding with loud noises that shook the 9 heavens. Immediately, the mountains and rivers of 50,000 li were shattered and completely overturned. At a glance, the mountains and rivers had disappeared. In this space, only endless yellow soil and ravines were left. The sky was also covered by endless dust. Clearly, the 28 divine kings' attacks had all missed. Everyone could sense that Ji Tianxing's aura was everywhere. There was no change and he was not affected. Why did Kenshin disappear? He must have hidden. This king can still sense his aura, he is right beside us. Damn it. This must be a brilliant escape technique. It's just that we are not strong enough to see through it. Everyone, don't let down your guard. Seal this area. We can't let him escape in the chaos. Don't just stand there, let's work together and find him. If we don't kill him today, we will all die if he comes for revenge in the future. Over 20 divine kings were stunned. They whispered to each other as they searched for Ji Tianxing. Jin Shuang's expression was also very gloomy, her eyes flashing with a sharp cold light. Strange, where is he hiding? I can clearly sense that he's in this area and hasn't escaped. However, Jin Shuang had long expected that even if Kenshin's strength had fallen, he would still have hundreds of divine abilities and ultimate skills. He would definitely be extremely difficult to deal with. However, he did not expect Kenshin's methods to be so strange. Without doing anything, he suddenly disappeared. The aura was clearly nearby, but no one could find it. What sorcery was this? Time passed quietly. 10 breaths, 20 breaths, 30 breaths. Everyone gave it their all and used all kinds of divine arts and techniques in an attempt to drag Ji Tianxing out. Not only did these godly monarchs scour the sky and earth in a radius of 25,000 kilometers, they even scoured a few alternate dimensions. However, in the end, they still found nothing. After 100 breaths of time, over 20 godly monarchs were at a loss. They had no choice but to expand their search area and seal off an area of 80,000 kilometers. Jin Shuang also used all kinds of methods, but to no avail. She could not help but sink into deep thought. Many godly monarchs looked at her and asked her through sound transmission, hoping that she could make a decision. Lord Commander, we've searched the area of 80,000 kilometers, but we still haven't found him. What should we do? Lord Commander, please make a decision. Hearing everyone's sound transmission, Jin Shuang frowned and shouted in a dignified tone, "Everyone, don't panic. He's only temporarily hiding and hasn't left this area. Although we still don't know what kind of crooked divine ability he's using for now, his goal is clear. However, his goal was obvious. He wanted to stall for time and make us panic. What we need to do now is to join hands and seal off this area so that he can never escape. Isn't he stalling for time? Then let's stall for time with him. In any case, we have countless reinforcements that will arrive one after another. One day, even if we have to destroy the space of 100,000 kilometers, we will still find him." Although the truth in front of everyone was that no one could do anything to Ji Tianxing. But for some reason, when everyone heard Jin Shuang's words, they did not feel depressed at all. Instead, they were excited and full of anticipation. Their morale returned to its peak. Everyone was full of confidence. They joined hands and used their divine abilities to seal off this area. Ji Tianxing merged with the world of 100,000 kilometers and hid in an invisible place. He heard everyone's reaction and Jin Shuang's words clearly. He immediately frowned and felt a little worried. Jin Shuang was right, and she hit the nail on the head. These godly monarchs could stall for time, but he could not delay any longer. Who knew what kind of unforeseen event would happen in an hour or 2 or 3 hours? Therefore, Ji Tianxing could only change his strategy. Since they are so persistent, then we can only fight a bloody battle and kill our way out of this encirclement. Thus, Ji Tianxing woke up everyone in the distorted space and time, as well as Chao Qingyu and his wife in the green jade divine ship. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. In the blink of an eye, several divine lights lit up in the sky, and 3 godly monarchs appeared. Yank, Chao Qingyu, and Lan appeared at the same time. They were all wearing mid-grade king-grade divine armors and wielding mid-grade king-grade divine artifacts. Following that, Yun Yao and Ji Tianxing appeared at the same time. Yun Yao was wearing the mid-grade king-grade ice moon divine armor and holding the sun and moon twin swords in both hands. She looked exceptionally holy and cold. As for Jiku, she was still cultivating in seclusion and was at the final juncture of breaking through to the godly king realm. Ji Tianxing did not disturb her. In addition, there was another godly king imprisoned in the 9 heavens Tenju Pagoda. The 7th stage realm godly king Baifeng. But unfortunately, Baifeng and Ji Tianxing had no enmity, nor did they have any relationship. Even though he had been imprisoned for so long, his willpower was still firm and he did not submit to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing could not care about him for the time being. He would deal with him later. Jin Shuang and the 28 godly kings were currently casting their arts to seal the heavens and earth. Suddenly seeing Ji Tianxing and the others appear, everyone revealed a pleasantly surprised expression as they started to discuss with sneers on their faces. "Ha! Lord Commander's method is indeed useful." Kenshin couldn't hold back and took the initiative to appear. That's right. He also knows that he can't escape even if he has wings, so he might as well give it his all and fight to the death. Tisk tsk tsk? I really didn't expect that back then. Kenshin was all-powerful and could summon the wind and rain. I don't know how many heroes followed him. But now, he has actually fallen to such a miserable state, with only a few shrimp soldiers and crab generals by his side. Kenshin, you were once unparalleled under the heavens, an unparalleled supreme powerhouse. Now that things have come to this, you might as well admit defeat and surrender. At least you can have a dignified death. Why do you want to fight to the death and end up in a tragedy? Many godly kings were mocking Ji Tianxing. But Ji Tianxing was unmoved. Holding the burial of heaven sword in his hand, he roared and took the lead to attack. Kill. Chapter 35:16. Ji Tianxing took the lead and charged out. He used his full strength right from the start, using the celestial dragon tyrant body to increase his battle prowess by 6 times. He transformed into a 10,000 feet tall golden-armored giant god and wielded the huge Burial of Heaven sword, unleashing his full strength. Rising Dragon Slash. He roared as he held the Burial of Heaven sword with both hands and slashed out 1,000 feet long golden sword light. Kaboom! Several god kings were sent flying by the sword light. The sky and earth were also split open by the sword light, revealing a 10,000 feet long rift. The pitch-black rift was like a chasm that divided the battlefield into two halves. Immediately after, Ji Tianxing used another ultimate skill. Omnidirectional Vanishing Shadows. In an instant, his body split into four, creating three clones that were indistinguishable from each other. 4 Ji Tianxing appeared on the battlefield. They were all 10,000 feet tall and shone with golden light, exuding a divine aura. Immediately after, something happened that made the God King's jaws drop. The 4 Ji Tianxing swung their swords at the same time, unleashing their full strength, but using different sword Dao abilities. Sky-splitting sword. Ancestral swords. Burial of Heaven sword. Celestial Dragon Slash. The dazzling divine sword light, carrying more than 100 divine Dao laws, slashed at the surrounding God Kings. The God Kings were all stunned. They all revealed expressions of shock and fear as they cried out. What's going on? There are 4 Kenshin? Cloning technique. This must be a cloning technique. Everyone be careful. Don't panic. Those 4 clones might be fake. We have to find the real Kenshin. Don't just stand there. Everyone work together to resist. Although more than 20 God Kings were panicking, they did not panic. However, they didn't lose their composure. Instead, they unleashed their ultimate skills and joined forces to block the sword light that filled the sky. Bam, bam, bam. Rumble. The sky-blotting Abhijna clashed with the sky-blotting sword Qi, resulting in a deafening explosion that shook the entire universe. Without a doubt, all the sword lights in the sky were shattered. No matter how great Ji Tianxing's capabilities were, it was also hard for him to match 28 divine king powerhouses. After the God Kings blocked Ji Tianxing's attack, they split into several groups and joined forces to attack him and his 3 clones. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yang, Chao Qingyu, Lan, and Yunyao all rushed over and started attacking valiantly. 8 Directional Holy Light Slash. Blue Sky Falling Sword Rain. Empty Valley Be Lan. Great Universe Sword. The 4 of them used their full strength and used their divine abilities and ultimate skills to attack the surrounding God King powerhouses. Many God Kings had no choice but to give up on surrounding Ji Tianxing and focus on fending off the attacks of Yang and the others. The pressure on Ji Tianxing was greatly reduced. He hurriedly controlled his 3 avatars to spread out and attack the various God Kings. However, Jin Shuang, who had been watching from the sidelines and controlling the overall situation, couldn't help but join the battle. He wasn't confused by the 3 avatars. After carefully observing for a moment, he found Ji Tianxing's true body. There was no other way. Ji Tianxing hadn't reached the peak of the God King realm, and he hadn't cultivated 10 directional absolute shadows to perfection. There was still a huge difference between his true body and his avatars. After all, his avatars only had half of his battle prowess. A high God King like Jin Shuang had rich battle experience and sharp eyes. Of course, he could tell. Kenshin Dai. Jin Shuang rushed into the battlefield, ignoring the 3 avatars. He waved his Frost Divine Blade and charged straight at Ji Tianxing. Heavenly Blade Frost. Jin Shuang shouted angrily. He held his blade with both hands and slashed out 9 blade lights that could split heaven and earth. The 9 blade lights contained more than 180 laws. They firmly locked onto Ji Tianxing's divine soul aura, making it impossible for him to dodge. Before the blade lights arrived, a bone-chilling cold air and a sharp and domineering blade intent enveloped Ji Tianxing. He could only give up on attacking the other God Kings and block Jin Shuang's attack with all his strength. Daylight Sword. Ji Tianxing held the Burial of Heaven sword with both hands and stabbed out with all his strength. A dense light dot flashed in front of him. A quarter of an instant later, that light appeared 100 miles away and completely exploded. the sacred golden sword light exploded into a golden halo that was a few hundred miles wide. It was as dazzling as the sun. Boom, boom, boom. The sacred golden ball of light blocked the 9 blade lights. It exploded with an earth-shattering sound and a destructive shockwave. However, the daylight sword collapsed on the spot, exploding into countless fragments of divine light. However, only 6 of the 9 ice blue frost blades were shattered. There were still 3 blade lights that struck Ji Tianxing. Bang, bang, bang. With a muffled sound, the 3,000-meter-tall Ji Tianxing was sent flying by the blade lights. Several cracks appeared on his divine power shield. He flew out a full 300 miles before he could disperse the terrifying impact and stabilize himself in the sky. After a few breaths, he calmed down his rampaging god power and quickly repaired his divine power shield. This scene made Jin Shuang's spirit rise as he laughed complacently. Your strength has indeed dropped too much. Even I can't block it. Since that's the case, you have no chance of survival. Today, you will be buried here. Before this, Jin Shuang had only heard the Shadow Executioner's report that Kenshin's strength had dropped a lot. Jin Shuang only dared to believe 60% of it. He still had some vigilance in his heart. Now, he personally verified Ji Tianxing's strength. He was even more certain that the Shadow Executioner did not lie to him. His confidence immediately soared and his attacks became even more ferocious. He attacked Ji Tianxing without holding back. The other 20 God Kings also saw Ji Tianxing being sent flying by Jin Shuang. Everyone was relieved and cheered in surprise. After all, they had all heard of Kenshin's glorious battle achievements. They instinctively feared and respected the unparalleled Kenshin. But now it was different. Kenshin had become a soft persimmon. He could not even beat Jin Shuang. Everyone saw hope. Their morale soared and they attacked Ji Tianxing's clones, Yank and the others even more ferociously. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Bang, bang, bang. Immediately, the 28 God Kings used all their strength and used all kinds of divine abilities to envelop the heaven and earth. The dazzling 5-colored divine light covered the radiance of the scorching sun, causing the area to become chaotic. Ji Tianxing's 3 clones were quickly beaten back, and countless cracks and gaps appeared on their bodies. Yank, Xiao Qingyu and the others also began to be injured and bleeding. They fell into a passive and dangerous situation. As for Ji Tianxing, Jin Shuang only stared at him and attacked fiercely. He suppressed him until he kept retreating. He could only try to deal with him. There was no other way. He was only a 4th-level God King. And Jin Shuang was an 8th-level God King who had been famous for many years. The difference in strength between the two was not small. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing had mastered all kinds of skills. That was why he could barely hold on and not be defeated. But even so, he was still in a dangerous situation. His divine power was severely depleted and he was soon injured. There was a huge disparity in the number of people on both sides. Now that Ji Tianxing and the others were at a disadvantage, defeat was a matter of time. Chapter 35:17. Unknowingly, a quarter of an hour passed. Ji Tianxing and the rest had already exchanged a few thousand blows with the God Kings led by Jin Shuang. Everyone's situation was even more dangerous, and their injuries were even worse. Ji Tianxing's 3 clones had already been surrounded by the God Kings and were defeated on the spot. Yun Yao had the mid-king level Frost Moon Divine Armor and the dual swords of Sun and Moon. Even if she was slightly weaker, she could at least protect herself, and her injuries were relatively light. However, Yank, Xiao Qingyu, and Lan Er's injuries were more severe, and they looked rather wretched. Their armors were shattered, and they were bathed in blood. Their robes and hair were in a mess, and their strength had greatly decreased. Especially Lan. Not only did she have more than 40 wounds on her body, but her left arm had also been cut off. Xiao Qingyu was so angry that his eyes were about to pop out. He tried his best to protect Lan, but it was to no avail. Instead, he made his injuries worse. Yank's defense was strong, but his body was too big, and speed was not his forte. When he was surrounded by 7 or 8 god kings, he became a live target, and at the same time, he was Chao Qingyu and the rest's protective wall. He suffered the most attacks and injuries. There were more than 100 wounds all over his body. Fortunately, he had thick skin and strong willpower, which allowed him to last until now. However, this could not go on. At most, in another quarter of an hour, he would be completely defeated and killed on the spot. Ji Tianxing's injuries were not light either. His white robe was dyed gold by the god's blood, and his hair was disheveled. He was in a sorry state. Although his combat strength was very strong, Jin Shuang was even stronger. Not only did he have to contend with Jin Shuang, but he also had to protect Yun Yao. The situation was too dangerous. He did not want Yun Yao to be fatally injured. It seemed that everyone could not hold on any longer. Especially Lan and Chao Qingyu. If they exchanged a few hundred more blows, they might be killed. Ji Tianxing was anxious. He was prepared to use the heaven-destroying sword formation to relieve everyone's pressure. However, if he did that, the pressure would be on him. The heaven-vanquishing sword formation could suppress the strength of the god kings and trap them here. But with over 20 god kings working together under Jin Shuang's leadership, it was very easy to break through the heavenly punishment sword formation. Once the heaven-destroying sword formation was forcefully destroyed, Ji Tianxing would suffer from the backlash of the divine formation and be severely injured. Therefore, the heaven-destroying sword formation could be considered a double-edged sword. Without sufficient confidence, it could not be used easily. At this moment, Ji Tianxing suddenly heard a clear female voice in his mind. "Brother Tianxing, let me help you." The sudden voice caused Ji Tianxing to be stunned for a moment. Then he realized that it was Ji Ku's voice. He was very surprised. He hurriedly used his soul consciousness to ask, "Ku, you finished your seclusion? Have you successfully broken through?" Ji Ku simply responded with a sound of acknowledgement. In the next moment, she opened the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda and appeared in front of Ji Tianxing. If it were anyone else, they could only wait for Ji Tianxing to open the divine pagoda before they could leave the distorted space-time. But Ji Ku was different. She could enter and exit the divine pagoda at any time. After all, she was the true master of the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda. Sush. Ji Ku, dressed in red, appeared beside Ji Tianxing. At this moment, she had a subtle change compared to before. Her height had increased by a bit, and her face was even more beautiful. She was also filled with the unique temperament of the demon clan. In other words, she looked like a beautiful and noble fire phoenix, full of hot and proud. And her strength had successfully broken through to the first level of the God King realm. Her strength had increased by several times. Ji Tianxing blocked Jin Shuang's fierce attacks while sizing up Ji Ku. Seeing Ji Ku's change, he sighed with joy. "A long time ago, I thought that Yao Yao would break through to the God King realm first. I didn't expect you to catch up before her." Ji Ku only smiled and nodded. She did not say anything. Her sharp gaze swept across the entire place. Soon, she saw the situation clearly. Seeing that everyone was severely injured, her heart jumped, and her brows furrowed tightly. "Brother Tianxing, I'll go help them. You hold on." Ji Ku reminded him through voice transmission before she teleported to Lan Er's side. Lan Er's injuries were the most severe. Her strength was the weakest, and she could not fight anymore. Ji Ku took the mid-grade king-tier divine sword from her hand and said, "Quickly go into seclusion to heal your injuries. Leave this to us." Lan Er did not refuse. Ji Ku hurriedly cast a spell and put her into the distorted space-time of the divine pagoda. Next, Ji Ku waved her divine sword and launched a counterattack against the surrounding god kings. Holy flames burning the heavens. Nirvana's wrath. Divine phoenix spreading wings. Ji Ku, who had just broken through to the god king realm, had the divine power in her body surging violently. She was worried that she would not be able to suppress the rampaging divine power. Therefore, she released all of it and used the divine phoenix unique skill. Instantly, the divine sword in her hand released a sky full of holy flames. Endless Nirvana's flames splashed out. Swoosh, swoosh. The few god kings in the surroundings were already heavily injured to begin with. Ji Ku's sudden appearance and use such an earth-shattering Phoenix Clan divine ability caught the few divine kings off guard. In the blink of an eye, 4 god kings were engulfed by the holy flames and Nirvana's flames. Their bodies were charred black, and they were close to being crippled. The god kings screamed in pain and fled the battlefield in a sorry state. They consumed divine pills to heal their injuries. Although Ji Ku was only a first heaven realm lower-level god king, the weakest of the god kings was a 5th heaven realm god king. However, the divine phoenix unique skill was so domineering. Only upper-level god kings could withstand the holy flames and Nirvana's flames. As for lower-level god kings and middle-level god kings, they could only dodge if they did not have special defensive abilities or divine weapons. The most troublesome thing was that after being burned by the holy flames and Nirvana's flames, they would need special high-grade divine pills to heal. Moreover, the recovery process was extremely slow. After the god kings escaped from the battlefield, even if they consumed divine pills to suppress their injuries, it was useless. In this way, they were considered to be crippled. They could no longer fight and kill. 3 divine messengers saw Ji Ku's outstanding performance and terrifying destructive power. They quickly rushed over to attack her. These 3 divine messengers were 7th heaven realm upper-level god kings. The holy flames and Nirvana's flames did not pose much of a threat to them. Even though Ji Ku used all her strength to execute her unique skill, she was unable to hurt them. Instead, she was forced to retreat. Soon, she was injured. Just like that, another 100 breaths of time passed. Chao Qingyu's injuries were too severe. Finally, he could not hold on any longer. Ji Tianxing quickly rushed over. Before he was killed, he kept him into the distorted space. After another 30 breaths of time, Yank finally could not hold on any longer. There was not a single part of his body that was intact. His body was filled with wounds and bloody holes. He was almost beaten into a sieve. Helpless, Ji Tianxing could only keep him into the distorted space and let him go into seclusion to heal his injuries. On the battlefield, only Ji Tianxing, Ji Ku and Yun Yao were left. Moreover, the 3 of them had suffered heavy injuries. Their abilities had decreased greatly. On the other hand, Jin Shuang's side still had 22 people. Chapter 35:18. At this point, the battle stopped for a moment. Jin Shuang and the 21 godly kings sealed off an area of 50,000 miles, forming a huge encirclement. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku gathered together and fought side by side. But at this point, the difference in numbers between the 2 sides was too great. They were outnumbered, and the disparity was too great. Furthermore, Ji Tianxing and the other 2's cultivation realms were much lower than the other parties. No matter what, the 3 of them could not defeat more than 20 godly kings. It was even difficult for them to escape. It was very likely that they would lose their lives here. It was a hopeless situation. This was a true hopeless situation. What should we do? At this point, we can only think of ways to escape. Tianxing, we can only take revenge in the future. Do you have a way to escape? Ji Ku and Yun Yao were frowning. Their bodies were covered in blood, and they looked very tragic. Ji Tianxing nodded and said in a serious tone, "If we have no other choice, we can use the godly pagoda to escape. I still have a trump card that I haven't used. However, I want to wait a little longer. There's something that I have to wait for an answer to." Ji Ku was stunned for a moment and asked doubtfully, "Big brother Tianxing, what is it?" She had been cultivating in seclusion and did not know much about the situation in the outside world. Yun Yao knew a little and asked through voice transmission, "Tianxing, you mean the ancient clans?" Ji Tianxing nodded and explained through voice transmission, "The reason why I exposed my identity in advance is to let the ancient clans see hope and not submit to the Azura God Emperor. Although I have some guesses and deductions about what the ancient clans will do, I'm only 60 to 70% sure. Only by waiting for an answer can I decide whether to rely on the ancient clans in the future." Yun Yao and Ji Ku immediately understood. "Brother Tianxing, do you mean that the people from the primordial clan will come? Even if they really come, they won't help us, right? After all, our forces are still very weak. It's impossible for them to go against Emperor God Xiao Luo for us. Ji Tianxing shook his head and said meaningfully, it might not be blatant. Yun Yao and Ji Ke frowned, not quite understanding what he meant. At this time, Jin Shuang and the 21 God Kings also took the opportunity to adjust their breathing. Although they were all injured, they had regained their vigor and fighting spirit. Kenshin, accept your fate. Don't put up any more resistance. The one who kills the Kenshin will be rewarded handsomely by the God Emperor. Jin Shuang and the other divine envoys all brandished their swords and shouted loudly. Under their lead, the many God Kings brandished their weapons and launched an attack with murderous intent. Swoosh, swoosh, swish, swish, swish. Thousands of five-colored divine lights poured down like a rain of arrows, about to drown Ji Tianxing and the others. The divine power that could destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth, and the vast divine power that sealed the heavens and the earth firmly locked onto Ji Tianxing. At the critical moment, Ji Tianxing decisively took out the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and put Ji Ku and Yun Yao inside. It's not time to fight anymore. You guys go into the pagoda to heal yourselves. I'll hold them back. With a flash of divine light, Ji Ku and Yun Yao disappeared. Only Ji Tianxing was left. He held the pagoda in his left hand and the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand. Looking at the divine light falling from the sky, he didn't hesitate to use the infinite sky of turbidity. Swish! With a flash of white light, Ji Tianxing disappeared again. This time, he merged with the heaven and earth within 200,000 miles and was even more hidden. The divine power attacks of the God Kings suddenly missed and landed heavily on the ground. As a result, the tens of thousands of miles of land that had already been turned into ruins was turned over again. Endless smoke and dust covered the sky. Within 50,000 miles, everything was in chaos. Nothing could be seen clearly. Jin Shuang and the 21 God Kings all stopped their attacks and fell into anger and madness. Waves of curses and roars exploded in the sky one after another. Damn it! That guy is hiding again. Damn Kenshin, this move again. What kind of sorcery is this? How can he use it at any time? Isn't he afraid of a backlash? Everyone, don't just stand there. Seal off this area first and then search carefully. He's already an arrow at the end of its flight. As long as we find him, we can definitely kill him. Jin Shuang and the God Kings began to search seriously. Soon, they searched the area within 50,000 miles. Everyone could only sense Ji Tianxing's aura, but they couldn't find any trace of him. Therefore, everyone expanded the search area and began to search the area within 100,000 miles. Including Jin Shuang, 22 God Kings were scattered within 100,000 miles. Clearly, the number of people was very sparse. They were too far away from each other, and their divine senses were unable to contact each other. At this time, 4 hazy silhouettes suddenly appeared underground in the north. Those were 4 God King powerhouses dressed in black robes. They all wore mid-grade king-level skull masks. They used an escape technique to quietly approach and sneak behind the 2 God Kings. Those 2 God Kings were still searching for Ji Tianxing's traces and didn't realize that danger was approaching. Suddenly, the 4 black-robed God Kings attacked, separately attacking the 2 God Kings. Bush, bush. Strange snake-shaped weapons and scarlet whips bloomed with resplendent cold light in the sky, releasing extremely sharp divine abilities. In the blink of an eye, those 2 God Kings were heavily injured. Bloody holes appeared in their chests, and they screamed as they flew back. The sudden, unforeseen event woke up the nearby 3 God Kings. They thought that Ji Tianxing had taken the opportunity to launch a sneak attack and hurriedly rushed over to help. However, before they could arrive, the 4 black-robed God Kings hid and fled the battlefield. Almost at the same time, on the southeast battlefield, there were also 3 God King powerhouses dressed in silver armor and wearing helmets. They quietly approached. Although, on the surface, one couldn't tell whether they were men or women. However, their eyes were deep and tranquil. They were obviously old men. Whoosh, whoosh. They quietly approached the 2 God Kings and suddenly attacked, heavily injuring those two god kings. Their bodies were covered in blood as they smashed into the ruins. After their attack succeeded, they didn't stay and immediately fled the battlefield, hiding far away. The nearby god kings heard the screams and cries for help and hurriedly rushed over to help. However, they didn't even see a shadow. Following that, the same scene played out in the southwest and south of the battlefield. The other two groups of oddly dressed god kings also covered their faces and quietly attacked the god kings under Jin Shuang. Just like that, including the 7 divine envoys, 11 of the 21 god kings were heavily injured and unable to continue fighting. Jin Shuang and the other 11 god kings were forced into a panic. They went everywhere to help, but they were always one step behind. Such a strange situation made Jin Shuang abnormally angry. She angrily roared, "Kenshin, for better or for worse, you were once an unparalleled sovereign. How can you be so despicable and sinister? What kind of man are you to hide in the dark and attack? If you have the ability, come out and fight with deceit." Chapter 35:19. It was impossible to fight a duel. Although Jin Shuang was stronger than Ji Tianxing and had full confidence in winning, he was not stupid. However, he wasn't that stupid and didn't want to waste any more time. As long as Ji Tianxing dared to show himself, he would bring the 10 divine kings and attack him to death. However, Jin Shuang's voice echoed in the sky. Tens of thousands of li of heaven and earth were silent. Ji Tianxing still hid and did not show himself. Jin Shuang became even more angry and cursed loudly, "Kenshin, you were so confident and arrogant in the past. Weren't you invincible in the god realm? How come you've become a coward and can't even beat a nobody like me? Where's your confidence and pride? Where's your face? Hiding in such humiliation, even if you come back from the dead, what's the point? The great Kenshin can only rely on sneak attacks to defeat a divine king weaker than you?" Like muffled thunder, rolling waves of sound echoed in the sky. But Ji Tianxing did not show himself. The other 10 divine kings frowned and hesitated, looking like they wanted to say something but stopped. Finally, a divine emissary gathered his courage and said, "Lord Commander, the ones who attacked them just now should not be Kenshin." Both the east and west were attacked at the same time, and there were several people who attacked them, all wearing masks. Jin Shuang was stunned for a moment, his face became very ugly and he angrily shouted, "Shut up! Do you think I don't know this? I said this to provoke Kenshin to show himself. What do you know?" The divine emissary shrunk his neck after being scolded. He quickly bowed and apologized, retreated to the side and did not dare to speak again. Jin Shuang's face was gloomy and his brows were tightly knitted. He silently calculated in his heart, "Damn it, someone is secretly helping Kenshin? Who could it be? Currently, Kenshin's power is still very weak, he only has a few followers. Which bastard dares to secretly help him?" Jin Shuang frowned and thought for a moment. A light flashed in his mind and he suddenly thought of something. Could it be those people from the ancient clans? That's right. Only the various large ancient clans would have so many God King experts. But back then, the Kenshin had fought all over the blessed enclaves and formed a deep grudge with the ancient clans. Those ancient clans have all submitted to His Majesty the God Emperor. Why would they help the Kenshin? Jin Shuang did not understand, nor did she dare to confirm the answer. Meanwhile, Ji Tianxing had merged with 200,000 miles of heaven and earth, but he could see everything that was happening in this area clearly. In this period of time just now, there were 5 groups of divine king powerhouses that infiltrated the battlefield from all directions. There were close to 20 of them, and they silently ambushed those divine kings, heavily injuring 11 of them, causing Jin Shuang's side's power to fall greatly. Ji Tianxing observed in secret, observing very carefully. Even though those god kings were all wearing masks that hid their physical features and faces, they were still able to see the god kings. However, through some details, Ji Tianxing made a preliminary judgment about the identities of the 5 groups of god kings. At this moment, Jin Shuang and the 10 divine kings gathered together, not daring to scatter. The 5 groups of masked divine king powerhouses also hid at the edge of the battlefield, no longer acting rashly. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing secretly sent a voice transmission, inquiring about the identities of those divine king powerhouses. He first asked about the group of divine king powerhouses in the north wearing skull masks. His divine sense voice transmission was clearly transmitted into the minds of those 4 divine kings. Thank you for your help. If I'm not wrong, you should be experts of the Phoenix clan, right? The 4 divine kings of the Phoenix clan who were wearing skull masks had concealed their presence and were hiding deep underground. They originally thought that they were hidden enough that no one would be able to discover them. Suddenly, Ji Tianxing's voice sounded in their minds, causing their bodies to stiffen and their hearts to surge with deep shock and reverence. After a moment of silence, the leading divine king said in a low voice, as expected of the Kenshin, "To be able to discover us under such circumstances, it's truly admirable." The other party's words clearly tacitly acknowledged the identity of the Phoenix clan. Ji Tianxing's tone eased up a lot and said, "Divine Phoenix clan leader, how have you been?" The leading divine Phoenix clan leader was stunned for a moment and said with a rather strange tone, "Kenshin, you long guessed that we would come to help you. That's why you deliberately stalled for time and hid in the dark, right?" Ji Tianxing said with a faint smile, "Sort of. Fortunately, you didn't disappoint me in the end. It wasn't in vain for me to help you revise the Phoenix clan's inheritance manual back then." 1,000 years ago, Ji Tianxing indeed went to the divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven and trampled all over the Phoenix clan's geniuses and powerhouses. Even the divine Phoenix clan leader only lasted 100 moves under his hands before being defeated regretfully. But Kenshin had no enmity with the Phoenix clan. The reason why he came to challenge them was also with the intention of exchanging pointers and learning. After the great battle of exchanging pointers, Kenshin pointed out the flaws of the Phoenix clan's inheritance manual and helped the Phoenix clan revise and improve the inheritance cultivation method. Therefore, the divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven and Kenshin could not be considered friends, but they had a deep relationship. The divine Phoenix clan leader fell silent for a moment before asking through voice transmission, "Kenshin, is Bai Feng still alive?" Ji Tianxing answered, "Of course." The divine Phoenix clan leader heaved a sigh of relief. He said through voice transmission, "Although Bai Feng's views are a little different from ours, he is still an elite genius of the Phoenix clan." Ji Tianxing smiled and asked, "So, you brought people to help me today because you want to take the opportunity to bring Bai Feng back?" The divine Phoenix clan leader hurriedly explained, "Of course not. I just want to confirm if he is still alive. If you are willing to keep him by your side, that is his blessing. Of course, as long as he does not offend you, I hope that you can still take care of him for the sake of the Phoenix clan." "No problem," Ji Tianxing agreed without hesitation. In any case, he did not plan to let Bai Feng go in the first place. He wanted to keep him by his side for a period of time and try to subdue him. With a 7th-level Divine King Realm bodyguard, it would be much more convenient for him to do anything. Both parties fell silent for a while. The Divine Phoenix clan leader was a little hesitant, but he still made up his mind. He said through voice transmission, "Kenshin, we are here to help you, but we cannot reveal our identities yet. I hope that you can keep this a secret. When you find an opportunity later, escape to the Xiaolong region as soon as possible. When the time is right, you will come back again, right?" It was obvious that this was what the Divine Phoenix clan leader was most concerned about. All the ancient clans felt that Kenshin and the Azura God Emperor were mortal enemies. Now that such a huge commotion had happened, it was to declare war on the Azura God Emperor. All the ancient clans saw hope. They wanted Kenshin to lead them against the Azura God Emperor. If Kenshin came back, it meant that they were not wrong. They were willing to wait. If Kenshin said that he would not come back or that he was afraid, they could only give up. After asking this question, the Divine Phoenix clan leader waited anxiously for an answer. He was afraid of hearing an answer like, "give up," or "hide." He was also afraid that after enduring for 1,000 years, he would be disappointed. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing did not hesitate at all. He replied firmly, "Of course I will come back. That day will come very soon. I will not make you wait for too long." Chapter 3520. Ji Tianxing's words were like a shot of adrenaline, jolting the divine Phoenix Patriarch. The other 3 divine Phoenix clan god kings were also filled with excitement. After receiving Ji Tianxing's answer, their trip had not been in vain. Even if they had to wait a few hundred or 1,000 years, they were willing. Furthermore, Ji Tianxing had clearly stated that he would not make them wait for too long. This was simply too exciting. The divine Phoenix Patriarch calmed his emotions and said with a voice transmission, "Kenshin, we will remember your words today. I hope you will not disappoint us." Ji Tianxing did not answer him and began to contact the 3 God King experts in the southeast. The 3 God Kings were all wearing silver armor. From their appearance, they seemed to be old men. Ji Tianxing used his divine sense to send a voice transmission and ask them, "Are you from the Lan family?" The 3 old men were hiding in the clouds high in the sky. They had concealed their tracks and auras as they observed the situation on the battlefield. The sudden voice startled them. They all looked around vigilantly. However, the leading old man quickly reacted and sent a voice transmission to Ji Tianxing. "Are you Kenshin? I am Lan Wuji. We haven't seen each other for 1,000 years, but your voice hasn't changed much." The old man named Lan Wuji's tone was somewhat excited and emotional. Very clearly, the Lan family also had a very deep relationship with the sword god. Before this, the Lan family only knew that Kenshin had returned and was being pursued by Jin Shuang and many other god kings. However, the Lan family experts had never seen Ji Tianxing before, nor could they contact him. They always had doubts in their hearts. They had rushed to the heavenly south region to find the truth with the intention of verifying the truth. They did not expect to meet Kenshin here. Although they did not see Kenshin's appearance, they heard Kenshin's voice. This trip was not in vain. Ji Tianxing's tone carried a smile as he sent a voice transmission. 8,000 years have passed, but Brother Lan is still in his prime. His cultivation has become even more vigorous. The 2 divine kings of the Lan family were overwhelmed with emotions, but they didn't dare to interrupt. They stared at the battlefield vigilantly. Lan Wuji was in charge of communicating with Ji Tianxing via voice transmission. He lamented, "Now, the world has changed. Today is different from the past. In order to preserve my strength and continue the bloodline of the Lan clan, I can only temporarily avoid the sharp edge. You, on the other hand, perished in front of everyone back then, and now you've returned in such a domineering manner. This is truly unbelievable. Kenshin, can you tell this old man, did you really die back then, or did you fake your death?" Ji Tianxing chose not to answer this question. He chuckled and said, "Don't ask about the past. You came to help me this time to ask for 2 answers. He already had the first answer. As for the second question, I can answer you clearly. Wait patiently, I will be back. This dark era will definitely come to an end." These few sentences of Ji Tianxing's all touched the bottom of Lan Wuji's heart. After getting a positive answer, he didn't ask any more questions. He immediately said in a serious tone, "All right, I believe you. When you return, the Lan clan will definitely help you with all our might." Ji Tianxing didn't say anything else. He contacted the few god kings in the southwest via voice transmission. Those were 4 god kings wearing dark golden armor and helmets. They were covered from head to toe. Even their eyes weren't exposed. They relied entirely on their divine senses to investigate everything around them. Of course, to deities, divine senses were always more useful than eyes. Even though they covered their faces tightly, Ji Tianxing was still able to identify them. "Brothers of the War God clan, how have you been?" Ji Tianxing's tone carried a smile as it transmitted into the minds of the 4 golden-armored god kings. Those 4 god kings were also stunned for a moment. Immediately they reacted. Their emotions fluctuated intensely, and they were rather excited. "Kenshin? It's really you? Ha! I already said several hundred years ago that Kenshin wouldn't die so easily. He must have faked his death. But they didn't believe me and even said that my brain was flooded with water. Reality has proven that I'm the wisest person. Kenshin, back then, you tortured us miserably. Now that you've returned, why don't you go to the Fighting Grotto Heaven to find us? You should at least let us beat you up to vent our anger. The 4 god kings of the War God clan were all masculine and domineering iron-blooded men. Their styles were more boorish. Even though they were the clan leader, protector, and elder of the War God clan, they were all of the same generation as Kenshin and addressed him as brothers. Back then, Ji Tianxing stayed in the Fighting Grotto Heaven for a relatively long time. It was a full 3 months. Almost every day, there were War God clan disciples challenging him. Both sides would spar. The War God clan was the most hot-blooded and warlike. Furthermore, they were all natural battle maniacs. The innate divine abilities they inherited were also very special. Although Kenshin defeated all the War God clan powerhouses, he also won the friendship and respect of the War God clan. At the same time, he also absorbed many advantages from the War God clan's innate divine abilities and added them into his own divine abilities. Hearing the voices of those few god kings, Ji Tianxing recalled the days back then in the Fighting Grotto Heaven. He could not help revealing a smile and said in a playful tone, "Brothers, if there's a chance in the future, I'll go to the Fighting Grotto Heaven again to find you all to spar." But very unfortunately, it's definitely not today. I'm very gratified that you all can come and help. Also, please rest assured, I'll be back very soon. I definitely won't make you all wait too long. Ji Tianxing did not exchange pleasantries with them and went straight to the point. The 4 War God clan's god kings immediately felt their blood boil. Their fighting spirit soared as they repeatedly cheered. "Good, we were waiting for you to say this. A gentleman's word cannot be taken back. We'll wait for you to come back. We've already been bored for 1,000 years, waiting for you to come back and overturn this dark world, stirring up a shocking storm again. The 8,000 men of the War God clan are ready and waiting for you to come back. We'll fight side by side." Ji Tianxing smiled slightly, somewhat moved in his heart. Interacting with that bunch of boorish fellows of the War God clan was always very simple and down to earth. Afterward, he contacted the 2 groups of God King experts in the south. One of the groups had 5 God Kings, all dressed in black and masked. They appeared to be exceptionally cautious. Seeing their secretive and cautious appearances, Ji Tianxing could not help but laugh. "Jiang Chuyan, even if you all put on a meticulous disguise and cover yourself up tightly, your cautious nature is just too obvious." A slightly mocking voice rang out in the minds of the masked God Kings. The 5 of them were stunned. The leader, the black-robed God King, was even more embarrassed and ashamed. "Senior Kenshin, previously in the God Induction Grotto Heaven, we had no choice. Please be magnanimous." The other 2 black-robed God Kings also spoke up. "Master, although we are only your in-name disciples, we will never forget your kindness to the Jiang clan. Master, please forgive us for our previous disrespect. That was just a temporary measure." Ji Tianxing did not waste time with them. He directly asked, "How's Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianxing's situation?" Jiang Chuyun hurriedly replied, "Senior Kenshin, please be at ease. Our clan is doing our best to save Jiang Tianxing. He will recover in at most 10 years. As for Jiang Tianyi, in name, I punished him to reflect on his mistakes behind closed doors, but in reality, I taught him the Jiang clan's secret arts in hopes that he can improve further." Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 35-21. Although some unpleasant things happened at the entrance of the God Attraction Grotto Heaven, Ji Tianxing did not blame the Jiang clan. He understood Jiang Chuyun, Jiang Chuxing, and Jiang Chushao very well. He knew that they had their own difficulties. Previously, when the Shadow Executioner God Emissary was present, they could only put on a show to protect the Jiang clan. But in reality, their hearts were on Kenshin's side. Therefore, Ji Tianxing predicted that they would rush to the Tianan region to help. There were a lot of things that everyone was well aware of and tacitly understood. Ji Tianxing did not waste any more words and directly gave the answer. The other ancient clans have not aroused Jin Shuang's suspicion for the time being. Only the Jiang clan is the most dangerous. Therefore, you must be more careful. Do not try to be brave. Bear with it for a few more years. This seat will return soon. When that time comes, We will settle the score with the Azura God Emperor. Jiang Chuyun was agitated. Her voice was also somewhat choked as she replied, "Many thanks for Senior's understanding and concern. No matter when, the Jiang clan will not be ungrateful villains." Previously, he was still thinking that he must explain clearly to Kenshin so that Kenshin would not bear a grudge against the Jiang clan and think that the Jiang clan was ungrateful. But he did not expect that Kenshin did not blame the Jiang clan at all. He even warned them to pay attention to their disguises and not expose themselves. This made Jiang Chuyun and the others very moved. They also respected Ji Tianxing even more. Ji Tianxing did not say anything more. He turned to contact another group of God King experts. There were only 3 God Kings in that group, but they were all God King realm experts at the 9th and 8th level. Especially the black-armored expert in the lead. He was very powerful, and his aura was also very oppressive and domineering. Previously, it was he who attacked and instantly severely injured Jin Shuang's 2 lackeys. Ji Tianxing used divine sense to transmit his voice. He said in a playful tone, "This seat is not surprised that the other clans came to help secretly. You're the only one who surprised me by bringing people here to help. Su Balian, you are here for the 100 refining divine hammers blueprint, right?" Suddenly hearing Ji Tianxing's transmission, the 3 God Kings were somewhat stunned. Especially the leader, Su Balian, frowned. He thought to himself, "This seat can clearly sense his aura within 100,000 miles, but he is nowhere to be found. Even the 3rd and 5th level of the alternate dimensions could not find any trace of him. I didn't expect that even though I couldn't find him, he could see me? What sorcery is this?" Back then, the sword god had made Su Balian feel both fear and admiration. He had met him twice and was very respectful. Now that he knew that the sword god had returned but his strength had dropped greatly, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. But he did not expect that he would personally come into contact with Kenshin today. The last traces contempts Zhang's. As God's God is God. God's God, as God's is. Since we are all smart people, this seat will speak the truth. Su Balian carefully observed his surroundings. At the same time, he transmitted his voice, "That's right. The 100 refining ancient sect only has hatred for you. There are 2 reasons why I came to the Southern Heaven region. First, I want to personally verify your identity. Second, I want the blueprint of the 100 refining divine hammer. After all, the 100 refining divine hammer is our sect's divine item. It is a peerless divine item left behind by our ancestors. If we can reforge the 100 refining divine hammer, we are willing to pay a huge price. For example, we can forgive you for what you did to us and help you." Ji Tianxing said playfully, "Since Sect Master Su is so straightforward, I will also be direct. We can make a deal. If you want the blueprint of the 100 refining divine hammer, I can give it to you. However, your conditions are far from enough." Su Balian was silent for a while. Then he said solemnly, "From today onwards, the 100 refining ancient sect will no longer be your enemy. When you return to the boundless heaven continent and lead the various primordial clans to fight against the Azura God Emperor, this seat will also lead the 100 refining ancient sect to fight with you." Without a doubt, Su Balian did not make this decision on the spur of the moment. He had thought it through long ago. On the surface, it seemed like he was making a huge sacrifice. However, everyone knew that the primordial clans did not fight against the Azura God Emperor to avenge Ji Tianxing. They were doing it for their own benefit. The primordial clans and Ji Tianxing were in a cooperative relationship. Everyone was just taking what they needed. However, Ji Tianxing did not have any more requests for the 100 refining ancient sect. Therefore, he agreed to this deal. "All right, Su Balian, this seat agrees. However, this deal can only be fulfilled when I return to the boundless heaven continent." Su Balian's gaze was firm. He said firmly, "It's a deal. This seat will wait for your return. Don't give up halfway. Otherwise, people will laugh their heads off." Ji Tianxing sneered and replied, "Don't worry. Even if you die, this seat will not die." Su Balian's face twitched. He originally wanted to retort with, "Didn't you die once back then?" However, he thought about it again. Kenshin might not have really died back then. Otherwise, how could he come back to life now? Thus, Su Balian suppressed his anger and did not say anything more. He brought his 2 guards and quietly left the battlefield. Soon they left. At this point, Ji Tianxing had appeased the 5 forces that came to help him. However, he believed that there were definitely other primordial clans that would come to help him secretly. It was just that those primordial clans were rather far away and had not arrived yet. However, he did not have time to waste. He could not wait any longer. Ji Tianxing and the 5 forces secretly communicated and spent a quarter of an hour. During this quarter of an hour, Jin Shuang brought the 10 god kings and was still searching around. The dozen or so god kings who were heavily injured also gathered together to consume divine pills to heal their injuries. They were also on guard against their surroundings. At this point, they could no longer participate in the battle. They could only pray that Jin Shuang could find Kenshin as soon as possible and kill him, ending this mission. Unfortunately, this was destined to be a dream. While Jin Shuang and the 10 god kings flew to the southernmost part of the battlefield to search, Ji Tianxing decisively retreated. He quickly shrank his body from a radius of 200,000 miles to a radius of 100,000 miles. However, Jin Shuang and the others were in the southernmost part, very close to the sea. The distance between Ji Tianxing and them became 100,000 miles. He had long left the range of Jin Shuang's divine sense. With a flash of white light, Ji Tianxing ended the limitless sky of turbidity state and appeared in the sky. He did not hesitate to fly to the southeast, quickly leaving the battlefield. At this time, Jin Shuang and the 10 god kings discovered that Ji Tianxing's aura had disappeared. Everyone was at a loss of what to do. They shouted and cursed anxiously, but to no avail. Jin Shuang realized that something was wrong. She hurriedly rushed back to the center of the battlefield and used her divine ability to search carefully. However, Ji Tianxing had already escaped far away. Even the primordial clans that secretly helped Ji Tianxing escaped after seeing Ji Tianxing with their own eyes. Jin Shuang found nothing. She could not even sense Ji Tianxing's aura. She was so angry that her entire body trembled. Her eyes were as red as blood. But I actually let that bastard escape. Sword God, there will be a day when I will tear you into pieces. Chapter 35-22. Before carrying out the interception plan, Jin Shuang was full of confidence, thinking that a shocking contribution would be easily obtained. But now, Kenshin escaped from under his nose. As long as Kenshin escaped into the Xiaolong Sea area, he would be like a bird flying in the sky and a fish jumping in the sea. It was basically impossible to catch him. On the contrary, the divine envoys and divine kings under Jin Shuang were all seriously injured, and it would be difficult for them to recover for many years. Because of this, Jin Shuang neglected his duty and did not have the face to see the Azura God Emperor. Kenshin caused such a huge disturbance in the boundless heaven continent, killing so many divine kings, domain lords, and divine envoys, but he could escape unscathed. Jin Shuang could not absolve himself from the blame. At the very least, he would be charged with incompetence and be punished by the Azura God Emperor. At the very least, he let go of the Azura God Emperor's lifelong enemy. He would definitely be severely punished. Even if he did not die, he would lose a layer of skin. Thinking of this, Jin Shuang was so angry that he almost exploded. He brought 10 divine kings and wandered hundreds of thousands of miles of coastline, searching for a long time. After 3 days, he found nothing and could only bring many divine kings and leave dejectedly. And at this time, those ancient clans returned satisfied. Ji Tianxing had already entered the Xiaolong Sea area long ago, flying all the way south. The storm in the boundless heaven continent calmed down. But many experts knew, or could guess, that Kenshin was just temporarily avoiding the spearhead. One day, he would definitely return strongly and take revenge on the Azura God Emperor. Xiaolong Sea area, located at the southern end of the boundless heaven continent, was one of the 9 great sea areas of the divine world. The environment of the endless sea area was very complicated and harsh. There were endless treasures and cultivation resources hidden at the bottom of the sea and on the islands. There were also countless dangerous forbidden areas, dangerous death zones at every step. Moreover, various races and large and small forces were intertwined, causing the situation to be very chaotic. Even the 5 emperors 1,000 years ago could only occupy the 4 continents of the Divine World and Reincarnation Island, and did not have the spare strength to invade the 9 Great Sea areas. After all, the 9 Great Sea areas had been the territory of the sea race since ancient times. In the endless sky sea, the sea race was the absolute overlord. Other races, forces, and countries did not dare to compete with the sea race. It was noon and the sun was shining brightly. On the boundless blue sea, the waves were boundless and the sea breeze whistled. The sword of the burial of heaven cut through the sky like a bolt of lightning. It galloped above the clouds, heading straight for the Samsara island in the south. Ji Tianxing had suffered heavy injuries and consumed a great deal of his divine power. He was recuperating in seclusion while the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda was placed in the Sword World. He was not the only one. Yun Yao, Jiku, Yank, Chao Qingyu, and Lan were all seriously injured and needed a long time to recuperate. Only 7 days had passed in the outside world, but Ji Tianxing had already been recuperating in the distorted space-time for a year. His injuries had finally healed, and his divine power had also recovered to its peak. Thus, he summoned the 9 Heavens Divine Cauldron and took out 9 sets of God King level forging materials to begin forging the divine weapon. He and Yun Yao both had their own divine weapons. Only Ji Ku still lacked a mid-king level divine spear. He took out Ji Ku's original origin stone divine spear and placed it into the divine cauldron to cast a spell to smelt it. A few hours later, he placed 9 sets of king-level materials into the divine cauldron again and began forging the divine spear. Now that he was even stronger, he could refine king-grade divine artifacts much faster. In just 2 days, the heavenly phoenix divine spear was completed. Next, he engraved nomological runes and restrictions on the divine spear. This process was relatively long and was the most important part of forging. After 7 days, he finally completed the forging. He engraved 330 nomological runes and 3,300 restrictions on the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Spear. A mid-king level Heavenly Phoenix Divine Spear was completed. Swoosh! When the Divine Cauldron opened, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Spear flew into the sky like a Zdian thunderbolt, setting off divine flames that covered the sky. The Divine Spear floated in midair, shining with divine light. There was a faint image of a phoenix spreading its wings. Ji Tianxing was very satisfied with this and revealed a gratified smile. He put away the divine cauldron and reached out to hold the heavenly phoenix divine spear. After looking at it for a while, he waved his hand and threw it into the depths of space-time. Swoosh! The heavenly phoenix divine spear turned into a Zdian and flew over a few hundred miles to Ji Ku's side. Ji Ku was recuperating under the bloody flame's sacred tree. The heavenly phoenix divine spear floated beside her and immediately injected surging divine power into her. As a result, her injuries healed at a faster rate. Ji Tianxing did not leave the distorted spacetime. Instead, he continued to cultivate the heaven-punishing divine art and worked hard to increase his strength. His revenge plan had already begun. He sounded the horn of revenge in the boundless heaven continent. Next, he had to work harder and return to the peak of the Divine King stage in the shortest time possible. Only then would he be qualified to take revenge and deal with the 5 thearchs. For an entire month, the Sword of Burial of Heaven had been speeding in the Xiaolong region. This region of the sea was very vast. It was at least 30% the size of the boundless heaven continent. The number of sea tribes, sea beasts, and living beings of various races living in this region of the sea was incalculable. While the Sword of Burial of Heaven was flying, it saw flocks of birds and beasts flying across the sky like clouds covering the sky. There were also hundreds of thousands of sea beasts in the vast sky and sea, fighting and killing each other. All kinds of sea beasts were also divided into thousands of races. They all had their own territories and areas of influence. It was impossible for the sea beasts to be united and live in peace. They would also fight and kill each other for many years. It was the same for the sea tribes. They would often start wars in order to fight for power, profit, territory, and resources. Of course, when facing foreign forces, be it sea beasts or sea tribes, they would be especially united. The Sword of Burial of Heaven looked at everything that was happening in the Xiaolong region. However, it did not have the intention to stay and observe. It directly flew past. In any case, its speed was fast enough. No one was blind enough to deal with it. They could not catch up with it at all. The journey was very peaceful. Until the evening of the 36th day, the Sword of Burial of Heaven flew over an island, but it stopped. At this time, the Sword of Burial of Heaven was already very far away from the boundless heaven continent. It was in the southeast of the Xiaolong region, only 10 days away from the Reincarnation Island. Originally, the Sword of Burial of Heaven would only stop when it reached the Reincarnation Island according to Ji Tianxing's instructions. However, what happened on the island below attracted the Sword of Burial of Heaven's attention. It was an island with a radius of 1,000 miles. It was nearly 3,000 feet above the sea surface. The island was surrounded by rugged reefs. In the middle of the island was a lush primitive forest, as well as undulating mountains and valleys. Overlooking the island from the sky, one could see that it was a desolate and uninhabited island. At the same time, it was also the only isolated island in the sea within a radius of 200,000 miles. However, the sky and sea around the island were densely packed with birds and sea beasts. They surrounded the island so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Hundreds of strange-looking experts of the sea tribes were controlling millions of sea beasts. They were besieging the people on the island. 3 divine warships were docked on the island. Traces of excavation and development could be vaguely seen in the mountains and forests. More than 200 experts of the God clan on the divine warships were all wearing similar armor and robes. They obviously belonged to a certain force. Chapter 35-23. Not only were the 200 God race experts wearing the same uniform, the flags on the 3 divine ships were the same as well as the engravings on the ships. Burial of Heaven observed for a while and saw that they were from a certain sect. According to the words on the ships, this sect was called the Chaohai sect. Chaohai sect, this name is unfamiliar. It shouldn't be a big sect. Burial of Heaven thought to himself as he continued to observe the situation. Most of the sea race experts were from the merman race and there were a few from the crab spirit race. Half of them looked like humans while the other half looked like fish and crab. They were surrounded by a special force field. They either stood proudly in the sky or stepped on the surface of the sea. They waved the scepters in their hands and used all kinds of sea race secret techniques. Under their control, the millions of sea beasts in the sky and sea charged towards the island, attacking the people of the Chaohai sect. The sea beasts filled the area of 10,000 miles and caused the island to shake. Huge waves appeared on the surface of the sea. There were many different kinds of sea beasts. There were sea eagles, golden falcons, blood gulls, batfish, red octopuses, sea-swallowing whales, and so on. The sea beasts weren't very intelligent and they weren't very strong. Most of them were in the true God realm and heavenly God realm. Only a few of the sea beast leaders could reach the divine monarch realm. However, they had the advantage in numbers. They flooded the island like a flood and drowned the entire island. The radiance of divine spells, colorful water arrows, ice blades, and blood spears rained down like a torrential downpour, and they did not stop for a moment. The 200 God race experts of the Chaohai sect were relying on the 3 God ships. They worked together to cast a formation to defend against the attacks of the sea beasts. Unfortunately, the defensive formation they had just cast couldn't last for more than a few breaths before it was destroyed. Every moment, there were many celestial deity realm disciples being killed, their bodies smashed to pieces. Even those divine lord realm elite disciples and deacons also suffered heavy injuries. There were people dying constantly. There were 3 divine king realm experts controlling the defensive formation and controlling the 3 divine warships. They were all lower god kings. 2 of them were in the first level of the God King realm, and 1 was in the third level of the God King realm. They were the strongest experts of the Chaohai sect. The golden armored man at the third King God realm was the patriarch of the Tidal Sea sect. The other 2 were first-stage God Kings in blue armor and scarlet battle robes. They were Chaohai sect's protector and grand elder. Although this battle had lasted for 2 hours, they were already exhausted long ago. However, they did not dare to slack off in the slightest. They had been setting up a defensive formation with all their might and controlling the divine battleships to counterattack the sea beasts. Boom! Boom! The 3 divine warships blasted out hundreds of divine power light pillars, destroying the divine power that filled the sky and striking the sea beast army around the island. Immediately, hundreds of birds in the sky were killed, and they fell into the sea like dumplings in a pot. All kinds of sea beasts on the surface of the sea were also smashed into pieces, splashing blood into the sky. The deafening sound reverberated in the air above the island for a long time. As time passed, the island was bombarded into pieces and gradually collapsed. More than half of the people from the Chaohai sect had died as well. Corpses were strewn all over the divine battleship. Only about 50 people were still fighting. Everyone's morale was low, and their faces were filled with despair. Although the 3 divine warships and 3 god kings had killed more than 200,000 sea beasts. Countless sea beasts' corpses were piled up in the sea. The sea water around the island was dyed red with blood. However, this number of casualties was nothing to the army of millions of sea beasts. The 700,000 sea beasts that were still alive were not afraid. Instead, they attacked even more ferociously. The dozens of people from the island and the Chaohai sect were about to be killed by the army of sea beasts. In the end, only the 3 god kings would have a chance to escape. Of course, they only had a chance. They did not have enough confidence. After all, most of the sea tribe members who were controlling the army of sea beasts were god monarchs. There were even 4 god kings. The battle was still going on. Burial of Heaven had already predicted the outcome and turned its attention to the island. Although the island was broken into pieces and looked like a ruin, it clearly remembered that there were traces of excavation and mining on the island. It deduced that the people from the Chaohai sect had occupied the island and were excavating something. It could be cultivation resources or some kind of rare treasure. The sea tribe members had also received the news and rushed over to attack the people from the Chaohai sect. They wanted to snatch the treasure on the island. This was very common in the divine world. The various divine spirits and divine nations of the various continents would start wars over cultivation resources and treasures. Not to mention, in the chaotic endless celestial ocean, this kind of thing was commonplace, even happening every day. Burial of Heaven secretly released its divine power and probed the ruined island. Soon, it sensed that there was a surging divine power under the island. It could vaguely sense that there seemed to be a rare mineral vein hidden under the ground. Burial of Heaven was tempted by this discovery. It had always known that Ji Tianxing was passionate about collecting cultivation resources and treasures to quickly increase his strength. Even though he already had a few 100 billion god stones worth of resources, it was still not enough for him. Not only did he need to consume cultivation resources, but the 5 elements world was also a bottomless pit that required countless resources to nurture. In addition, Yunyao, Jiku, Yank, Xiaoqingyu, Lin Shui, and the others followed Ji Tianxing and required a lot of resources. Therefore, Burial of Heaven thought about it and decided to wake up Ji Tianxing, who was cultivating. Tianxing, I've discovered an island that has a rare mineral vein buried there. It's of a rather high grade. A small sect called the Chaohai sect occupied this island but was besieged by the sea tribe's army of sea beasts. Are you interested in joining in? At this time, Ji Tianxing was cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime. Burial of Heaven had been traveling for 36 days, and 1,800 days had passed in the distorted spacetime. It was close to 5 years. In the first year, Ji Tianxing was busy healing his injuries and refining the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Spear for Jiku. In the next 4 years, he had been cultivating the heaven-punishing divine art and working hard to increase his strength. With the help of abundant cultivation resources, his strength increased very quickly and had reached the late stage of the 4th level Divine King realm. Compared to before, his strength had doubled. Suddenly, he heard Burial of Heaven's voice. Ji Tianxing thought about it and ended his cultivation and left the distorted spacetime. He left the sword world and appeared above the island while remaining invisible. Holding the Burial of Heaven sword, he looked down at the sea below and observed the sea beast army and the situation on the island. In just a few breaths, Ji Tianxing saw the situation clearly. How long have they been fighting? He asked Burial of Heaven with his divine telekinesis. Burial of Heaven answered honestly, "It should be 4 to 6 hours." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said calmly, "Wait a little longer. It's not time to make a move yet." Wonderful Book House. Chapter 35-24. More than half of the 200 people from the Chaohai sect had been killed. Of the 100 people who were still alive, more than 70 were severely injured and could only hide in the damaged divine warships. There were only 20 people left, and they were still resisting the attacks of the sea beasts. However, more than 600,000 sea beasts landed on the island from all directions. They were like a pitch-black tide that was about to drown the 3 divine ships in no time. Burial of Heaven thought that Ji Tianxing would act decisively and save the survivors of the Chaohai sect. It was a little surprised to hear Ji Tianxing's reply. However, after thinking about it carefully, it understood. The Chaohai sect was the first to discover and excavate the precious mineral veins on the island. If Ji Tianxing acted now and defeated the oceanic tribe experts and the sea beasts, saving the people of the Chaohai sect, then it would be a headache to decide how to distribute the mineral veins on the island. He had saved the lives of the Chaohai sect. If the Chaohai sect was generous and smart enough, they might give half of the mineral veins to Ji Tianxing as a thank you gift. If the Chaohai sect was stingy and immature, they might just thank him verbally and give him a small gift at most. In the end, Ji Tianxing would only get a thank you and get nothing. It would be a waste of effort. Therefore, it was only right to wait for the right time to act. Burial of Heaven didn't think that there was anything wrong with this. If they wanted to blame someone, they could only blame the oceanic tribe for being too cruel and the Chaohai sect for being too weak. Time passed quietly. Soon, another 15 minutes had passed. The battle on the island was nearing its end. It was about to end. 2 of the 3 divine warships of the Chaohai sect had been destroyed. They had been completely destroyed by the sea beasts. The remaining divine warship was also full of holes and looked like a broken sieve. The 60 or so survivors were all hiding in the divine warship, heavily injured and weak. The people who could still stand were only left with 3 divine king powerhouses. However, they were also covered in blood and their divine power was weak. They couldn't continue. The divine warship was filled with sorrow and despair. Everyone felt that death was coming and their hearts were dead. The 3 god kings stood on top of the divine ship. They stubbornly straightened their bodies and bravely faced death. The oceanic species powerhouses cast spells to control the sea beast army, and all of them retreated into the sea. The army of 600,000 sea beasts quickly quieted down and surrounded the island. Swish, swish. At this time, hundreds of sea tribe experts in strange clothes flew above the island. The 4 god kings of the oceanic race looked down at the 3 god kings of the tidal sea sect and tried to persuade them to surrender. Su Chaohai, your Chaohai sect has crossed the line. The mine on this island isn't something you can touch. Southeast of the Xiaolong Sea area, the area of about 100 million miles is the territory of the Ocean Rock Empire. This island and everything buried underground belong to the Ocean Rock Empire. Su Chaohai, we've already warned you to stay on your island, and the Empire will still tolerate you. But since you insist on seeking death, then don't blame us for being merciless. This time, the elites of your Chaohai sect have all died here. The Chaohai sect will only exist in name now. Stop resisting stubbornly and surrender obediently. The 4 god kings of the oceanic species were very arrogant, and their words were very domineering. The Chaohai sect master, Protector, and Grand Elder clenched their fists in anger, but they could only suppress their anger and remain silent. It was true that the Chaohai sect had all died here, and it was equivalent to them being destroyed. There were only two paths in front of them. They could either surrender or die. If they surrendered, they could keep their lives, but they and the dozens of surviving disciples would become slaves of the oceanic species. At that time, they could only stay at the dark and cold bottom of the sea, excavating mines year after year and doing the lowest of hard labor. It was better to die than to live such a dark and gloomy life. Seeing that Su Chaohai, Protector, and Grand Elder didn't say anything, the God King of the oceanic species sneered. Su Chaohai, you know the rules of the Ocean Rock Empire. As long as you surrender, everyone will be spared. But you will all become slaves of our race, and you will do hard labor at the bottom of the sea until you die. However, I can give you a way out. As long as you surrender, the three of you will submit to our race, and you will be spared from hard labor. I will arrange other jobs for the three of you, and you won't have to excavate mines like those lowly slaves. As soon as he finished speaking, another God King of the oceanic species hurriedly said, Su Chaohai, General Nan is making an exception for you. Why aren't you thanking him? Su Chaohai was very hesitant, and his heart was filled with complex emotions. Victory and defeat, glory and disgrace, rise and fall, it all depends on a single thought. If the oceanic species hadn't discovered us, the meteorite mine on this island would have been enough for our sect to rise. But now it's all over? Su Chaohai was originally a burly and dignified middle-aged man, but at this moment his heart was dead, and he seemed to have aged greatly. The Protector and Grand Elder looked at him and whispered, Sect Master, it's better to live than to die. As long as we survive, we will have a chance to rise again. Sect Master, we can self-destruct and die together with the oceanic species. But behind us, there are dozens of injured disciples and thousands of family members in the sect. It was clear that the Protector and Grand Elder wanted to persuade Su Chaohai to surrender. Su Chaohai thought about it again, and his ambitions were all for naught. He could only lower his head and admit defeat. General Nan, please remember what you said just now. Just as Su Chaohai was about to speak and announce his surrender, in the sky above the island, divine starlight suddenly lit up and a rain of swords fell from the sky. Moreover, there was a loud and dignified male voice that sounded in the sky. The bastards of the oceanic species are wreaking havoc again. They deserve to die. Under everyone's shocked and stunned gazes, a dragon tribe youth wearing a white robe and over 10 feet tall appeared on the scene. This person's body was tall and sturdy like an iron tower. His body was covered in golden dragon scales, and there was a dragon horn on his forehead. His face was handsome and resolute, and golden dragon breath surrounded him, making him look especially divine and dignified. His left hand was behind his back, and his right hand held a pitch-black divine sword that pointed diagonally to the ground. He was very mysterious. You are. Su Chaohai frowned, and a glimmer of hope lit up in his despairing eyes. Where did this bastard come from? How dare you meddle in our affairs? General Nan of the oceanic species was furious, and he glared at the dragon tribe youth with murderous intent. However, the dragon tribe youth did not speak, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a contemptuous sneer. In the next moment, a rain of starry swords fell from the sky. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. A total of 30,000 giant starry swords fell like a meteor shower, covering a radius of 30,000 miles. Before the giant swords arrived, the invisible pressure that suppressed the heavens and the earth had already sealed the area. Hundreds of thousands of sea beasts panicked, and they let out roars of despair as they fled desperately. Hundreds of oceanic species masters were also shocked by the unparalleled sharp sword chi, and they all looked panicked and desperate. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 35-25. Boom, boom, boom. Before the Sea Tribe's experts could escape from the island, the starry giant swords that blotted out the sky and covered the earth came crashing down. At this moment, all that was left was the dazzling sword radiance. the sword chi that could destroy everything, and the deafening explosion. The starry swords had sealed off everything within a radius of 30,000 miles. The four supreme gods of the sea tribe tried their best to form a formation to block the starry swords. The hundreds of sea tribe elites were scared out of their wits and could only work together to block the starry swords. The hundreds of thousands of sea beasts had already been intimidated by the starry swords and could only try their best to escape. After being killed by the starry swords, the sea beast army suffered the most casualties. At least 400,000 sea beasts were slashed into pieces on the spot by the starry sword. Minced meat and blood splashed all over the sky. Instantly, the island was covered in blood and flesh, and the sea within 30,000 miles turned dark red. The hundreds of thousands of sea beasts that were lucky enough to survive were also affected by the sword chi and suffered injuries of varying degrees. They were so scared that they lost their minds and tried to escape into the distance. However, the 20,000 starry swords sealed off the area and formed a dazzling starry swords net. In the blink of an eye, the heaven-destroying sword formation was formed. The sea beasts that were trying to escape were all blocked by the sword formation's light wall and had nowhere to run. As for the hundreds of sea tribe elites who were controlling the sea beast army, they suffered heavy casualties under the starry swords net. More than 50 of them were killed on the spot and had their bones crushed. The 40 or so people who were lucky enough to survive were still in a state of shock, their hearts filled with shock. Even the four supreme gods of the sea tribe had suffered heavy injuries and were in a sorry state. Only the divine battleship of the Xiaohai sect was not affected by the starry swords net. Everyone on the divine battleship was unharmed. Seeing this scene, Su Xiaohai, the guardian, and the Grand Elder were all stunned. After regaining their senses, the three of them were overjoyed and cheered excitedly. This is too terrifying. This senior's methods are simply unbelievable. We are saved. Senior, thank you for saving our lives. The heavens are protecting the Xiaohai sect. The four supreme gods of the sea tribe were in a completely different mood from Su Xiaohai and the others. They were all covered in blood and panting, glaring angrily at the Dragon Clan youth. For you, tell me your name if you have the guts. We are nobles of the Ocean Rock Empire, soldiers under the command of the Southern Expedition Marshal. Have you ever considered the consequences of attacking us? Brat, you shouldn't meddle in other people's business. No matter how strong you are, don't even think about leaving the Xiaolong Oceanic area alive after angering the Ocean Rock Empire. They angrily glared at the dragon young man, roaring and cursing. The dragon youth was none other than Ji Tianxing. In the Xiaolong Sea area, of course, he wouldn't show his real face to others to avoid unnecessary troubles. Using the Dragon Clan's secret technique to disguise himself as a member of the Dragon Clan was a good choice. He was not angry at all when he heard the curses of the four oceanic race god kings. Instead, he sneered and said, "It's just the Ocean Rock Empire. What do we have to fear? I have killed at least 8 million sea race beasts, if not 10 million. You can only consider yourselves unlucky to have met me." The four sea tribes' god kings and dozens of sea tribes experts felt extremely humiliated. They roared and cursed in anger. Su Xiaohai and the rest were unusually excited. They were so excited that their blood was boiling. Ji Tianxing's words were too domineering and he sounded extremely confident. Moreover, he was able to fight against the sea tribes' army alone and kill so many sea beasts and sea tribes experts. One could imagine how powerful he was. The people of the Xiaohai sect saw the hope of survival. Everyone believed that with Ji Tianxing around, they wouldn't die. Then, Ji Tianxing stopped talking to the sea tribes' god kings and swung his sword to kill the four sea tribes' god kings. At the same time, the Sky Punishment Sword formation was fully activated and started to kill the sea tribes' experts and sea beasts. Swish, 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 swish. The sea beasts couldn't resist at all and were instantly shredded into pieces. Blood rained down from the sky. Even the sea tribes' God Lord realm experts were smashed into pieces once they were swept up by the sword storm. Only the 4 sea tribes' god kings could barely resist the sword storm and the sword storm. However, they were held back by Ji Tianxing and couldn't even take care of themselves. It was impossible for them to protect the other sea tribe members. Ji Tianxing's left hand struck out palm shadows and fist radiance while his right hand swung the burial of heaven and used all sorts of sword Dao techniques. He attacked the 4 sea race divine kings all by himself and actually beat them back repeatedly. It was too horrible to look at. Su Chaohai, the guardian, and the Grand Elder were shocked to see such a scene. They were very respectful of Ji Tianxing. Seeing Ji Tianxing killing the 4 sea tribes' god kings, they couldn't help but discuss with each other through voice transmissions. Sect Master, should we help that senior? Yes, Sect Master. That senior is kind enough to save us. Isn't it inappropriate for us to watch the battle here? All right. Although we are injured, those 4 sea tribes' divine creatures are even more severely injured. If we don't help them, we will be too insensible. The 3 of them discussed for a while and decided to help Ji Tianxing attack the 4 sea tribes' god kings. Blood Sea Tide Sword, Divine Thunderbolt Palm, Divine Light Fist. Su Chaohai, the Guardian, and the Grand Elder used all their strength and used their divine abilities to attack the sea tribes' god kings. Unexpectedly, those few sea race divine kings executed divine abilities and supreme skills, easily blocking their attacks. General Nan, who was the leader, even took the opportunity to counterattack. He furiously thrusted out spear shadows that filled the sky towards the Protector and the Great Elder. The Guardian and the Grand Elder couldn't dodge in time and were immediately struck by the spear shadows. Just as the 2 of them were about to be severely injured, Ji Tianxing swung his sword at the critical moment and destroyed the spear shadows. Bam, 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 bam. Hundreds of violent spear shadows exploded in front of the 2 of them. Billions of divine light fragments burst forth. The Protector and the Great Elder were relieved of a heavy burden and revealed a look of joy after surviving a calamity. At this moment, Ji Tianxing said coldly with an expressionless face, "Back off, don't add to the trouble." Su Chaohai, the Guardian, and the Grand Elder blushed and returned to the divine worship in shame. Indeed, with their strength and means, they couldn't help much. Instead, they added to the trouble. However, as God King experts, it was a little embarrassing for them to be despised like this. However, the other party was a high and mighty expert of the Dragon Tribe. Although they were ashamed, they weren't angry. Instead, they felt that they were too careless and reckless. The battle didn't last for too long. In just a short 100 breaths, everything was over. The 4 sea tribes' god kings were killed one by Ji Tianxing. They were all smashed into pieces and their godheads collapsed. As for the sea beast army and dozens of sea tribe experts, they were all killed by the sword formation and turned into a bloody pulp. Chapter 35-26. The battle had ended. The sea around the island gradually regained its calm. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and removed the sky-vanquishing sword formation. The surging waves that were thousands of feet tall also gradually stopped. The godly light fragments and blood rain that filled the sky gradually dissipated. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing kept the godhead fragments of the 4 sea tribe deity kings, as well as the king-grade divine artifacts and infinite space rings that were scattered among the ruins. Then he landed on the Chaohai sect's divine ship. Su Chaohai, the Guardian, and the Grand Elder had already led more than 20 survivors. They lined up neatly and bowed to Ji Tianxing to express their gratitude. "Senior, thank you for saving our lives. The Chaohai sect will never forget this." Under Su Chaohai's lead, everyone bowed and thanked Qin Fan in unison. Their tone and attitude were very sincere. Even though they were severely injured and covered in blood, they still had to endure the pain. However, everyone endured the pain and endured their injuries. They had to thank Ji Tianxing first. Ji Tianxing nodded calmly. He raised his hands and said, "Everyone, please rise." Su Chaohai and the others stood up. Su Chaohai gestured for the disciples and deacons to return to the divine ship to heal their injuries. Only he, the Guardian, and the Grand Elder were left. They looked at Ji Tianxing with gratitude. Senior, the Chaohai sect is unable to repay your kindness. We only hope that you can tell us your name. In the future, we will pray for you day and night. The Sea tribe has always been cruel and domineering. There is almost no place for outsiders like us to survive in the Xiaolong region. If we were not lucky enough to meet you, the entire Chaohai sect would have been destroyed. The three of them surrounded Ji Tianxing and couldn't help but express their gratitude. Ji Tianxing was still calm. He looked around the island and didn't say anything. Su Chaohai and the other two felt a little awkward when they saw that Ji Tianxing didn't react. Therefore, Su Chaohai asked Ji Tianxing, Senior, how should I address you? Heavenly Dragon Deity King. Ji Tianxing casually replied. Su Chaohai quickly cupped his fists and said respectfully, So it's Heavenly Dragon Deity King, Junior greets you. May I know where Senior cultivates? He originally wanted to worm his way into Ji Tianxing's friendship. Unexpectedly, Ji Tianxing was not interested at all. He asked straightforwardly, There is a mineral vein under this island. What kind of mineral vein is it? Su Chaohai was stunned for a moment, then he scratched his head awkwardly. At this moment he suddenly understood many things. As it turned out, this senior sky dragon did not know him at all, nor did he care about the survival of the Chaohai sect. In comparison, he was more interested in the mineral veins under the island. Su Chaohai thought about it again. This was also human nature. It was a matter of course. After all, the Chaohai sect didn't even know deity King Tianlong, let alone have any relationship with him. Why would he save the Chaohai sect for no reason at all? After figuring this out, Su Chaohai quickly replied, Senior's insight is truly admirable. You're right, there is indeed a mineral vein under this island. And it's a very precious and rare meteorite mineral vein. Meteorite mineral vein? Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and smiled with interest. If the Chaohai sect could take such a high-grade mineral vein, they would be able to achieve great things. It's no wonder that the Ocean Rock Empire would send the Oceanic Tribe and Oceanic Beast Army to kill you. All right, is there any crystal core in the meteorite mineral vein? Su Chaohai hesitated for a moment, then waved his hand to signal the Guardian and Grand Elder to leave so that they could lead the disciples to clean up the battlefield. After that, he led Ji Tianxing into the divine worship and they entered a secret room for a detailed discussion. Senior Sky Dragon, please allow me to explain to you what happened. Su Chaohai was very humble, but he was not in a hurry to answer Ji Tianxing's question. Ji Tianxing could guess what he was thinking. Su Chaohai was most likely going to talk about how difficult it was for the Chaohai sect and how much they needed the mineral vein. However, he did not refuse. He nodded and said, All right, tell me about it. Su Chaohai heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly said, Half a month ago, 2 elders of the Chaohai sect passed by this place and discovered by chance that there was a mineral vein under this island that had been desolate for 10,000 years. Moreover, the divine energy within it was very dense. It should be a high-grade mineral vein. One of the elders stayed here while the other elder returned to the sect to report the situation. My Chaohai sect had been living in a remote corner for the past few thousand years and had been struggling to survive. The appearance of this mineral vein made me so excited that I had to obtain it no matter what. Therefore, I mobilized all the elites of the Chaohai sect and went out in full force. We've occupied this island and set up a sealing formation. I, the Guardian, and the elders went underground to investigate and found that it was a meteorite mineral vein. According to my deduction, there must be a star crystal core in the mineral vein. Moreover, it is not an ordinary planet crystal core. It is most likely a star crystal core. Upon hearing this, Ji Tianxing could not help but nod and smile. Even an ordinary star crystal core is enough to forge an intermediate king-level divine artifact. If it is an earth fiend or heaven star crystal core, it can even be used to forge an upper king-level or supreme divine artifact. Together with the mineral vein, the Chaohai sect will be able to develop rapidly with such abundant resources. Su Chaohai smiled bitterly and shook his head. Senior Sky Dragon, you may not know this, but the Chaohai sect is not qualified to enjoy the stellar crystal core. As long as I can obtain the mineral vein, I will be satisfied. Ji Tianxing frowned and asked, "Are you going to offer the stellar crystal core to the Ocean Rock Empire?" "Of course not." Su Chaohai quickly waved his hand and said angrily, "The Oceanic tribe is cruel and tyrannical. I hate them to the core. How can I offer them a tribute? I intend to offer the meteorite crystal core to the Reincarnation Island Master, the peerless god of the underworld. Only in this way can the Chaohai sect exchange it for a few spots to enter the Fortune Divine Palace and establish a relationship with the Reincarnation Island. If we have the Reincarnation Island as our backer, the Oceanic tribe will not dare to bully us. Offer the meteorite crystal core to the god of the underworld? Exchange it for a spot to enter the Fortune Divine Palace?" Ji Tianxing frowned and looked puzzled. Su Chaohai was stunned by Huang Xiaolong's reaction. He quickly asked, "Senior Sky Dragon, you are not from the Reincarnation Island, are you?" Ji Tianxing answered and asked, "Is there a twist in this?" Su Chaohai suddenly understood and said, "No wonder you don't know about this. It is like this, I have heard of a legend about the Fortune Divine Palace. It is said that 1,000 years ago, when the god of the underworld achieved great success in his cultivation and unified the Reincarnation Island, he chanced upon a supreme divine bead in the Reincarnation Island's forbidden area. That divine bead has the miraculous effect of nurturing all living things and opening heaven's fortune. Not only can it awaken the intelligence of plants and beasts, but it can also enhance the divine spirit's talent. However, the god of the underworld had long surpassed the god-king realm and had no use for that divine bead. Therefore, he built a Fortune Divine Palace and placed the divine bead inside, providing it to his subordinates and geniuses to enhance their strength. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 35-27. Su Chaohai's eyes shone brightly as he spoke, revealing a look of longing. It was obvious that he had a strong desire for the legendary Fortune Divine Palace and the Supreme Divine Pearl. Ji Tianxing's heart skipped a beat, and an idea flashed through his mind. He nodded calmly and said, "Su Chaohai, continue." Seeing Huang Xiaolong's interest, Su Chaohai continued, "Every living being that enters the Fortune Divine Palace, regardless of race, whether it's a flower, a tree, a bird, or a beast, after being baptized by the Fortune Divine Light, their intelligence and talent will be enhanced. In the first 200 years, the elites and geniuses under the god of the underworld would often enter the Fortune Divine Palace to be baptized. But after a while, there was no longer any effect. Later, the god of the underworld changed the rules, and the Fortune Divine Palace would only open once every 100 years. Whether it was the soldiers and geniuses under his command, or the forces of various races that were willing to serve him, as long as they paid the appropriate price, they would be able to enter the Fortune Divine Palace. In this way, the god of the underworld won over the hearts of the people, and won a good reputation and praise. In the past few hundred years, he had subdued many forces and experts from various races. After listening to Su Chaohai's story, Ji Tianxing had a better understanding of the Fortune Divine Palace. He nodded slightly and asked, "Su Chaohai, have you seen the god of the underworld? Is he on the Reincarnation Island now?" Su Chaohai laughed self-deprecatingly and shook his head. "Senior must be joking. How could a small fry like me be qualified to see the true face of the God Emperor? Not to mention me, even many of the territorial lords on the Reincarnation Island have not seen the god of the underworld. After all, the god of the underworld had not shown himself after he took over the Reincarnation Island and stabilized the situation. According to the rumors, the God Emperor is not on the Reincarnation Island. He might be comprehending a divine technique in the outer space. Usually, the authority of the Reincarnation Island is controlled by Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal. They are the right-hand men of the god of the underworld. They are also respected higher deity kings. Ordinary people can't even meet them. Knowing that the god of the underworld had not shown up for hundreds of years, Ji Tianxing's mind suddenly became active. Especially the Fortune Divine Palace and the Supreme Divine Bead that Su Chaohai had mentioned. which made him even more restless. Then he asked Su Chaohai about the reincarnation island. Su Chaohai told him everything he knew. An hour later, the exchange between the two of them ended. Next, it was time to get to the main topic. Ji Tianxing looked at Su Chaohai, pointed at the island under his feet, and said, "This king wants that mineral vein and the meteorite crystal core. Is there a problem?" Su Chaohai was startled for a moment. His face was a little ugly. It was obvious that he felt the pinch. However, he was already mentally prepared for this. But when Ji Tianxing made this request, his heart ached so much that he couldn't breathe. After hesitating for a moment, he took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and made a decision. No problem. If it wasn't for Senior's help, the tidal sea sect would have been destroyed, and we would have become the sea tribe's slaves. We are already very lucky to be able to keep our lives. As for the mineral vein and crystal core, they should belong to Senior Tianlong, even though the tidal sea sect's efforts were in vain. However, the fact that he and his 20 or so disciples were able to survive was already a blessing from the heavens. What more could he ask for? It would be foolish of him to not let go of the mineral vein. He would even offend Tianlong. Ji Tianxing looked at Su Chaohai with a smile and asked, "Are you sure there's no problem? Are you sincere?" Since he had already made the decision, he couldn't regret it. Otherwise, he would be looked down upon. Thinking of this, Su Chaohai quickly nodded and said firmly, "Of course I'm sincere." Ji Tianxing laughed. "All right, the meteorite crystal core is mine. I want half of the mineral vein, and the other half is for the tidal sea sect. You guys are already miserable enough. With half of the mineral vein's resources, you should have a chance to recover." Su Chaohai was stunned when he heard these two sentences. He couldn't believe his ears. His eyes widened, and a look of disbelief appeared on his face. He couldn't believe that someone would be so generous as to give him half of the mineral vein. That was a huge mineral vein that was 800 miles long. Even if it was half of the mineral vein, the stellar heavenly stones it contained would be worth 400 to 500 billion. After the initial shock, he was filled with joy and surprise. Su Chaohai quickly bowed to Ji Tianxing and thanked him emotionally. "Thank you for your generosity, Senior Tianlong. I represent all the disciples of the tidal sea sect to thank you for your generosity." Su Chaohai said a lot of words of gratitude. Of course, they were all sincere and convinced. Ji Tianxing smiled and waved his hand. "All right, let's not waste any more time. Let's start mining now." Su Chaohai quickly agreed. "Senior, please wait for a moment. I'll go and gather them now." Ji Tianxing waved his hand again. "Your men can rest. I'll arrange for people to mine the mineral vein. Just follow me." "All right." Su Chaohai looked around. He didn't see anyone else beside Ji Tianxing. However, he believed that a powerhouse like Heaven Dragon Deity King would have many mysterious tricks up his sleeve. As expected. After 100 breaths, Su Chaohai saw for himself. Deep under the island, a silver mineral vein, 800 miles long and 10 miles wide, was lying quietly in the rock layer. This mine was like a huge silver dragon, entrenched in the depths of the earth and sleeping for tens of thousands of years. Only 3 people had entered the underground: Ji Tianxing, Su Chaohai, and the 300 zhang tall Yank. Su Chaohai felt dizzy when he saw Yan Ku, who was as big as a rock giant. He was shocked beyond words. Heavens! This stone giant is a mid-god king. A mid-god king is actually Senior Tianlong's follower and guard. Could Senior Tianlong be a high-god king? He must be. Otherwise, how could he kill the entire sea race and sea beast army by himself? After the shock, Su Chaohai was puzzled. He and Ji Tianxing stood on top of the mine and watched as Yan Ke entered the rock layer alone and sneaked into the mine. A thought appeared in his mind. Senior Tianlong said that only this stone giant was mining the mineral vein? If he's alone, how long is he going to mine? Su Chaohai was worried. If this dragged on for too long, the Sea Rock Empire would send an army for revenge. That would be troublesome. However, what happened next left him dumbstruck. He had truly widened his horizons. He saw Yank enter the meteorite mineral vein and use the divine ability that Ji Tianxing had taught him. He excavated the ore at an unimaginable speed. Every time he used the divine ability, he could excavate a few dozen miles of the mineral vein. The mysterious dazzling golden light continued to wash the mountainous pile of ores. In just 15 minutes, the ores within a radius of several dozen miles had turned into hundreds of millions of star divine stones of the same size that had been purified and refined. This was the work of over 100 monarch god experts in 10 days. Yank's methods were simply amazing. Chapter 35-28. Initially, Su Chaohai thought that it would take at least a month to excavate the mine. Moreover, it would take more than 200 people from the Chaohai sect to excavate the mine day and night. But now, Yank only used 16 hours to excavate the entire mine. What was even more terrifying was that not only did he excavate the mine, he even refined and purified the ores. The half of the mine that was handed over to Su Chaohai was actually 2 billion star god stones of the same size. This was just too terrifying and unbelievable. Su Chaohai was still in a daze when he received the star god stones and kept them in his spatial ring. Ji Tianxing looked at him calmly and said, 2 billion star god stones are worth 200 billion normal god stones. It should be enough for the Chaohai sect to recover. We shouldn't stay here for too long. The people from the Ocean Rock Empire might be here soon. You should leave. After hearing Ji Tianxing's words, Su Chaohai finally came back to his senses. He hurriedly nodded in agreement and bowed to Ji Tianxing. Senior Tianlong, you are the savior of the Chaohai sect, the reincarnated parent. Although the Chaohai sect is weak, we will never forget your kindness. In the future, if you have any orders, the Chaohai sect will do it even if we have to climb a mountain of swords or dive into a sea of fire. Su Chaohai's eyes were slightly red as he said these words of gratitude. Ji Tianxing did not take it to heart. He only nodded and waved his hand, indicating for him to leave first. After Su Chaohai thanked him profusely, he returned to the damaged divine ship and left the nameless island with the 20 or so surviving disciples and the corpses of many disciples. When the divine ship flew into the sky, he could not help but look at Yank. He sighed in his heart. A mid-level god king with such great skills is willing to be Senior Tianlong's follower. I can imagine that Senior Tianlong is a high-level god king with great skills. It's a pity that the Chaohai sect is too weak and can't enter Senior Tianlong's eyes. If we can get on Senior Tianlong's good side, the Chaohai sect will definitely prosper. Although Su Chaohai was full of regret, he knew his own limits. After lamenting for a while, he gave up on his unrealistic fantasies and started to think about how to restore the Chaohai sect's strength. With 200 billion god stones worth of resources in his hands, he had enough confidence. Master, this is the meteorite crystal core that you asked for. On the nameless island Ji Tianxing, Yank held a red crystal the size of a wash basin. The crystal core was as clear as ice, but it was also as red as blood. It emitted a scorching heat and a violent fluctuation of divine power. Ji Tianxing took the meteorite crystal core and examined it carefully for a while. Then he smiled in delight. Not bad, it is indeed a star-level crystal core. Moreover, the quality of this crystal core is extremely high. It should be an Earth-level stellar core. There were countless stars and stars and stars, stars then stars. Most of them were ordinary planets of little value or planets that contained a small amount of resources. Stars to us, stars by star among the stars, there were also differences in strength. There were ordinary stars, Earth fiend stars, and heaven star stars. Some people said that the reason why a star was called a star was because it existed forever and would never fall. But that was not the case. There were times when stars would be destroyed and fall. When an entire star collapsed, it would turn into billions of pieces that drifted in the void. Most of them would be burned to ashes. Only the most elite stellar cores could be preserved. They would either drift in the endless starry sky or land on some stars. However, the probability of this happening was very small. It was precisely because of this that stellar crystal cores were exceptionally precious and rare. Ordinary stellar cores were priceless treasures. An Earth-class stellar crystal core was a peerless treasure that was hard to come by in 100 years. Not only could it be used to refine king-grade high-grade divine artifacts, but it could also provide an endless amount of star energy that could be used repeatedly. And the current Ji Tianxing lacked treasures of this level. 4 God Kings Godhead fragments, 200 billion spirit stones worth of resources, and an Earth-class meteorite crystal core. This trip was not in vain. Ji Tianxing weighed the meteorite crystal core and kept it in his spatial ring. He left the island with satisfaction. Yang had nothing to do, so he returned to the distorted space-time and went into seclusion to cultivate. Ji Tianxing flew across the sky alone and rushed towards the Reincarnation Island. The Fortune Divine Palace that Su Chaohai mentioned had successfully piqued his interest. Moreover, the god of the underworld was not on the Reincarnation Island. The current Reincarnation Island was guarded by Commander Mingi and Marshal Blood Prison. They were just 2 high-level god kings. Even if they had reached the 9th heaven realm, Ji Tianxing was not worried. After all, his methods and rich experience were enough to deal with any god king. Only the 5 emperors, who had surpassed the god king realm and reached the highest realm, could make him helpless. Peerless divine pearl? It can release the holy light of creation and increase the talent and intelligence of all living beings? Interesting. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself, and a playful smile appeared on his face. The nameless island was not far from the Reincarnation Island. It was only a 10-day journey. The Ocean Rock Empire reacted quickly. In just 3 days, a large group of God King realm experts and millions of sea beasts headed towards the nameless island to seek revenge. Unfortunately, the nameless island had already collapsed into ruins. Ji Tianxing and the people from the Chaohai sect had already left, and the Sea Tribe had missed their target. The Sea Tribe's god kings roared and cursed in anger for a long time before leaving resentfully. Next, they would definitely trample the Chaohai sect and kill every single one of them to vent their anger. However, Su Chaohai had already expected this and used his fastest speed to escape with the Chaohai sect's family members. 10 days later, the Sea Tribe's army arrived at the Chaohai sect and missed their target again. At this time, Ji Tianxing had already arrived at the Reincarnation Island. In these 10 days, the Sword of Burial of Heaven was in charge of the journey. He stayed in the distorted space-time and cultivated in seclusion for more than a year. He refined the godhead fragments of the 4 Sea Tribes' god kings. Although he had only added a few divine Tao laws and his strength had increased slightly. However, the blood flame sacred tree had gained a lot and its growth was gratifying. During the battle on the nameless island, Ji Tianxing had slaughtered 600,000 sea beasts, hundreds of Sea Tribes experts and 4 god kings. The blood flame sacred tree had absorbed too much blood and soul essence and had grown over 1,000 feet tall. Now, it was already 200,000 feet tall. In terms of divine artifacts, it was already a peak mid-grade king realm sacred tree. If there were a few more times, it might break through and become a high-grade king realm sacred tree. This discovery made Ji Tianxing very happy. At the same time, he felt a little awkward. The blood flame sacred tree was about to become a high-grade king realm sacred tree, but he was still a 5th heaven realm god king. He was still far from becoming a high-grade god king. Could it be that he was inferior to a tree? Chapter 35-29. Ji Tianxing was no stranger to the Reincarnation Island. 1,000 years ago, he had come here many times and even stayed for 2 or 3 years. However, back then, the Reincarnation Island had no master and was in a state of disunity. A few ancient clans were high above and protected the Reincarnation Island in name. But in reality, the ancient clans were also fighting openly and secretly for the control of the space-time passage. They often fought fiercely. The Reincarnation Island's territory was only 20% of the Boundless Heaven continent's territory. There were 18 territories on the island, and each territory's leader was an overlord. They were constantly at war with each other. For the sake of territory, And also for the sake of fighting for cultivation resources, starting wars was a common thing. Of course, this was the reincarnation island 1,000 years ago. The situation was very chaotic. Ever since the god of the underworld unified the entire island, the chaotic situation had ended. First of all, the ancient clans had obediently tucked their tails between their legs and kept a low profile, not daring to cause trouble. Secondly, the 18 territories' leaders had all pledged loyalty to the god of the underworld. The god of the underworld had probably used some method to control the lives of the various territories' leaders. Therefore, those territories' leaders were extremely loyal to the god of the underworld. Even Ji Tianxing would use Yang's life as a threat to force Yang to work for him. It would be strange if evil people like Azura and the god of the underworld did not use some method to control the lives of so many territories' leaders. Of course, not long ago, Ji Tianxing had already removed the divine power in Yang's body. In other words, Yang had already regained his freedom, and Ji Tianxing would no longer threaten him. However, he had no intention of leaving. Instead, he stayed by Ji Tianxing's side loyally, willing to be Ji Tianxing's guard. For nearly 1,000 years, the reincarnation island had been very peaceful. The 18 territories' leaders had all submitted. They were the god of the underworld's trusted subordinates, and they guarded the reincarnation island. It could be said that nothing could go wrong. Because of this, the god of the underworld could not come out of seclusion and hand over power to Commander Styx and the Blood Prison Marshal. When Ji Tianxing landed on the reincarnation island, the sun was setting in the west. The setting sun was like blood, and the sunset glow filled the sky. Boundless blue waves slapped against the reefs, shores, and beaches. Thousands of feet away from the shore, there was a lush forest. Ji Tianxing flew across the sky at lightning speed, heading straight for the center of Reincarnation Island. After a few hours, the god kingdom where the gods gathered appeared in front of them. There were many towns located on the plains. The Reincarnation Island's location was special. It was surrounded by the endless sky sea. Therefore, the sea breeze whistled all year round, and there were often shocking tsunamis and hurricanes. Fortunately, there were experts guarding the surrounding regions of the island. Every time a tsunami or hurricane struck, those experts would use their divine abilities to avert the disaster. Ji Tianxing landed in a city and snuck into the city as a young man from the dragon race. Millions of deities and commoners gathered in this city that spanned over 300 miles. Ji Tianxing strolled around the city. His divine sense quietly spread out to explore the local conditions and customs. The situation was the same as before. Most of the millions of commoners in the city were from the god race. However, there were many other races mixed in, and even the sea race. Races from all over the world were able to live in harmony and trade on an equal footing here. After all, this was the territory of the god of the underworld. Even the arrogant and domineering sea race would not dare to act rashly here. At the same time, Ji Tianxing found more than a dozen shrines in the city. They all worshipped statues of the god of the underworld. Almost every day, many commoners would go to the shrines to kneel and pray. When Ji Tianxing passed through the city, he had a panoramic view of the city. He left quietly and continued to rush to the center of the Reincarnation Island. In the next few days, he passed by several empires and dozens of cities. He would stop for a moment in each city and release his divine sense to observe. The results were the same as before. The empires and cities were prosperous, peaceful, and stable. A large number of shrines had been built in each city to worship the statues of the god of the underworld. Going to the shrines to worship and pray had become a weekly homework for the commoners. It was like a mission and a mission. Ji Tianxing could not help but suspect that the god of the underworld was the same as the Shura god emperor. He was also collecting the power of faith of the commoners in order to cultivate some kind of divine skill. In addition, he also found a large number of laborers and laborers in each god kingdom. Those lowly slaves and laborers had to do hard labor on the Reincarnation Island or go to the endless sky sea to mine. Ji Tianxing observed for a while and found that these slaves and laborers were all from other races. There were basically no god race. Even if there were, they were very few criminals who had committed heinous crimes. After all, the god race was the noblest race in the god realm. The ascenders from the lower realm and the gods of other races were very lowly. If these people did not have a force to take them in, they could only do hard labor and could not escape the sea of suffering for the rest of their lives. After discovering the situation, Ji Tianxing spent a little time to inquire about the details. After investigation, he learned that this was the order of the god of the underworld. Every region and every empire had to pay a certain amount of taxes every year, which were also cultivation resources. And those god kingdoms needed to collect enough slaves and laborers to complete their missions. The vast majority of slaves and laborers could not escape the miserable fate of their lives. And the commoners of the god race had long been accustomed to this and did not feel sympathy. In any case, in their eyes, other than the god race, all other races were lowly and despicable. Ji Tianxing's heart was somewhat heavy about this. Previously, this was the situation in the boundless heaven continent. I didn't expect it to be the same on the reincarnation island. I reckon those 3 bastards on the other 3 continents will do the same. They are all doing the same thing, collecting the power of faith of the commoners and crazily accumulating cultivation resources to carry out some unspeakable things. The ordinary god race is not a victim, so they will not oppose the tyrannical rule of the 5 emperors. But all the living beings of the various races are harmed, and the various ancient clans are also the ones who suffer losses. Only they will oppose. With this thought in mind, Ji Tianxing could not help but wonder, what is the god-emperor realm above the god-king realm like? Why do the 5 emperors collect the power of faith of the commoners and crazily seize resources? What are they trying to do? With such doubts in mind, Ji Tianxing walked and stopped all the way. 10 days later, he arrived at Yudu. Yudu was the capital of Reincarnation Island. This city was located at the center of Reincarnation Island and covered an area of 500 miles, accommodating millions of gods and commoners. The city was abnormally prosperous. Even on the surrounding mountains outside the city, many courtyards and palaces were built. This was the core of Reincarnation Island and also the nest of the god of the underworld. Most importantly, the Creation Divine Palace was in Yudu City. When Ji Tianxing entered Yudu, he deeply felt the prosperity and clamor of this place. The city gates were full of people, and people had to line up to be checked before entering or leaving. When he entered the city, all he saw were palaces and pavilions. It was a magnificent sight. The god race who entered and left the shops, tea houses, and wine shops were all well-dressed and dignified. Clearly, this place was not only rich, but also a gathering place for elites and experts. Sword piercing the 9 heavens, sword piercing the 9 heavens. Chapter 35-30. Ji Tianxing was here for the Fortune Divine Palace. He had a meteorite crystal core in his hand. As long as he offered it to Commander Styx and Marshal Blood Prison, he could exchange it for a spot to enter the Divine Palace. However, he was reluctant to part with the Earth Fiend Star Core unless he had no other choice. On top of that, he wasn't familiar with the situation in Yudu and didn't know anything about the Fortune Divine Palace. After strolling around Yudu for 4 hours, he entered the city center to find a place to gather information. The Mystic Sky restaurant was one of the more luxurious restaurants in the city center, and its business was booming. Ji Tianxing scanned the restaurant with his consciousness and found several hundred Divine Monarch Realm experts gathered in the restaurant. There were even a few God King Realm auras. In the restaurant, the waiters who served tea and wine were all in the Heaven God Realm. Ji Tianxing stepped into the Mystic Sky restaurant and spent 5,000 divine stones to order a jug of wine. He then sat down in the middle of the main hall. He sat alone at a table and drank leisurely, appearing to be very low-key. Secretly, he was eavesdropping on the discussions in the main hall. There were more than 30 tables in the main hall, and more than 100 Divine Monarch Realm experts were gathered there. Although these people were from different races and dressed strangely, this didn't stop them from talking. However, this did not stop them from talking loudly. Words such as Fortune Divine Palace, receiving baptism, and gaining enlightenment on the spot were often mixed in between their words. After all, the Fortune Divine Palace only opened once every 100 years. Every time, only 100 lucky people could receive the baptism of the divine light and improve their talent and aptitude. This time, the Fortune Divine Palace opened 3 days later. In the last half a month, there were many experts in Yudu. In the restaurants and tea houses in the city, the common people were discussing the Fortune Divine Palace. Ji Tianxing listened for a while and obtained a lot of information about the Divine Palace from the crowd. At this time, the 2 waiters at the entrance of the main hall suddenly shouted respectfully, "Welcome, young Master Yuan." Hearing this sudden shout, the main hall fell silent for a moment. After that, everyone looked towards the entrance with faces full of excitement and anticipation as they started to whisper in each other's ears. "Young Master Yuan is here? Since he went into seclusion last time, he hasn't harmed Yudu for 3 years, right? Hey, be careful when you speak. Don't let young Master Yuan hear you. I heard that the domain lord of Soaring Wind spent a lot of effort to get a transcendent divine pellet. Young Master Yuan has already broken through to the Divine King realm after consuming that divine pellet." Young Master Yuan broke through to the God King realm? Does that mean he's going to enter the Fortune Divine Palace? Isn't that obvious? Soaring Wind Region's domain lord had a noble status and was greatly appreciated by the God Emperor. Although young Master Yuan is a dandy, he has received many benefits. That brat was a scourge in the past, always stirring up trouble and making Yudu restless. Now that I've broken through to the Divine King realm and entered the Divine Palace to receive the baptism, won't I be able to ascend to the heavens in the future? Oh right, there's still young Master Qian upstairs. He's still drinking in the private room. Did young Master Yuan come here to show off in front of young Master Qian? That makes sense. These 2 hedonistic young masters had always been at odds with each other, both openly and covertly. However, young Master Qian had already broken through to the God King realm 50 years ago. Thus, young Master Yuan often suffered losses. Now that he finally broke through to Divine King, he definitely has to get back at them. There's going to be a good show today. Most of the hundreds of god monarchs in the hall were locals of Yudu, and many of them were descendants of influential officials. As the saying goes, one doesn't mind watching a good show. The rumored dandy young Master Yuan had yet to appear, but many of the onlookers had already imagined what would happen next. Everyone was discussing fervently and excitedly. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, had an indifferent expression. He was drinking by himself and thinking about many miscellaneous matters. At this moment, 4 majestic guards in golden armor strode into the hall with sabers and swords in their hands. Immediately after, 2 servants bowed and welcomed a young man from the god clan in a golden robe and a luxurious divine crown. That young man was dressed extravagantly and had an extraordinary aura. He held his head high and had a domineering air about him. Seeing him enter the hall, many of the onlookers stood up and greeted him with cupped fists. "Greetings, young Master Yuan. We haven't seen each other for 3 years, and young Master Yuan is even more elegant than before. I heard that young Master recently broke through to the God King realm. Congratulations." At least a dozen tables of people were sucking up to young Master Yuan and fawning over him. Young Master Yuan had a confident smile on his handsome face. He looked at the crowd with a smile and said, "Yo, why are there so many people here today? You guys are quite well informed. Could it be that you are gathered here to congratulate me and give me a surprise?" Young Master Yuan had a cynical and playful attitude. 4 majestic golden armored guards followed beside him with a ferocious demeanor. No matter how one looked at it, this was the standard of a dandy young master. Although everyone could tell that he was mocking them, there were still many people who hurriedly nodded and took the opportunity to curry favor with him. Young Master Yuan smiled contemptuously and walked up to the 2nd floor. "All right, you guys celebrate here. I'll go upstairs to drink." 4 golden armored protectors and 2 servants hurriedly escorted him upstairs. However, a skinny God Clan youth wearing a black robe with golden patterns walked out of the Heaven private room on the second floor. This person held a wine pot in his hand and leaned against the railing. He looked down at young Master Yuan at the stairs and said expressionlessly, "I've booked all the private rooms on the second floor." His voice wasn't loud, but it reverberated in the hall and entered everyone's ears clearly. The hall instantly quieted down. Everyone's eyes gathered on the black-robed youth. It's young Master Qian. It's the son of the Yudu city master, Qian Yuan. I've long heard that young Master Qian and young Master Yuan don't get along. It seems like it's true. Isn't this a slap to young Master Yuan's face? The show is about to start. Can young Master Yuan take this lying down? Let's see how he retaliates. In the crowd, a wave of whispers sounded out. As expected, young Master Yuan's face turned cold. He stared at young Master Qian sharply and sneered, "Qian Yuan, there are only 5 of you. What right do you have to book all the private rooms? You're purposely going against me." "Humph, I've just broken through to the Divine King realm a few days ago. Are you feeling guilty and scared? Are you purposely trying to disgust me?" Qian Yuan glanced at him and said expressionlessly, "Yuan Ji, don't flatter yourself. I've just broken through to the second level of the Divine King realm 3 days ago. I've already set up a banquet here to entertain my friends. I've already booked the private rooms. If you don't believe me, you can ask the innkeeper." From the first level to the second level in just 50 years? Yuan Ji's face changed, and his heart skipped a beat. His previous confidence and high spirits instantly vanished into thin air. He looked at the innkeeper with a dark face and shouted, "Is what he said true?" The innkeeper looked at him and then at Qian Yuan on the second floor. He could only smile bitterly and didn't dare to say anything. After all, these 2 young masters had shocking backgrounds. The innkeeper couldn't afford to offend either of them. Young Master Yuan was well aware of this, but he didn't say anything else to avoid further embarrassment. His face returned to normal. He chuckled and said, "Since young Master Qian has booked the second floor and is hiding in a private room with your friends, of course, I don't want to join in the fun. I'll just stay in this hall and drink with my friends from all over the world. It's not only above board, but also fun with the people. Today, I'll pay for all the drinks in this hall." As soon as he said that, not only did he humiliate Qian Yuan, but he also made hundreds of people in the hall cheer. Many people thanked Yuan Ji and took the opportunity to flatter and praise him. Seeing Qian Yuan return to the private room with a gloomy face, Yuan Ji felt refreshed. He looked around the hall and his eyes fell on Ji Tianxing. He pointed at the table and said, "Sit there." Chapter 35-31. The dozens of tables in the hall were filled with people. Only Ji Tianxing was sitting at the table in the middle of the hall. He was the only one there. Yuan Ji pointed casually, and the 4 golden armored guards and 2 servants walked toward Ji Tianxing. Thump, thump, thump. The 4 golden armored guards surrounded Ji Tianxing, and the bearded leader knocked on the table. He looked down at Ji Tianxing and said arrogantly, "Kid, can't you be a little more observant? Young Master Yuan wants to have fun with the people. Why don't you step aside?" The other 3 golden armored protectors, the 2 servants, and the spectators in the hall all focused their attention on Ji Tianxing. Even Yuan Ji stood to the side, waving his fan calmly, waiting for Ji Tianxing to step aside. Unexpectedly, Ji Tianxing unhurriedly put down his wine cup. Without even looking at the guard, he said, "I went first. Why should I give up my seat?" "Hey!" The leading golden armored guard glared at Ji Tianxing and scolded, "Kid, you don't know how to appreciate favors. Do you know who this is? The famous young Master Yuan, the only son of the Zone Master of Soaring Wind, a young immortal king, a top genius. I'm flattering you by asking you to give up your seat. If you don't, I'll throw you out." As he said that, he pretended to attack. The other 3 golden armored guards were also eager to give it a try. "Wait." Yuan Ji waved his fan pretentiously and said with a smile, "How many times have I taught you not to be so rude? You'll make me look like a bully." This young hero doesn't want to step aside because he cares about his wine money. After he finished speaking, he waved his hand and threw a spatial ring on the table in front of Ji Tianxing. There are 10,000 immortal stones here. Take the money and leave. Yuan Ji thought he was a forthright person. His words and expression were always arrogant. After throwing the space ring, he sat opposite Ji Tianxing. Everyone thought that Yuan Ji had given Ji Tianxing a way out, and he should take the money and leave. However, Ji Tianxing didn't even look at the space ring. He said calmly, "I just want to sit here and drink. I don't want to be disturbed. I won't step aside from this table. I don't want your immortal stones." Although his expression was very calm, his tone was very firm and contained an unquestionable tone. Immediately, Yuan Ji frowned and looked at him coldly. The 4 golden armored guards were furious. They rubbed their fists and palms, ready to attack. As for the 2 manservants of the restaurant, they hurriedly winked at Ji Tianxing and transmitted a voice to advise him to be sensible and not to anger eldest young Master Yuan. There was a burst of whispers in the crowd. Is that kid out of his mind? How dare he embarrass Yuan Ji? Ha! Young Master Qian only dares to embarrass Yuan Ji because he has a strong background. Who does this kid think he is? How dare he provoke Yuan Ji? I bet this kid won't live to see tomorrow's sun. His corpse will soon be on the streets. Yuan Ji always takes revenge for the smallest grievance. This kid is digging his own grave. Just wait and see. That kid will be thrown out of the mysterious sky tower soon. Ji Tianxing and Yuan Ji heard the crowd's discussion. Ji Tianxing's expression remained the same, and no one could see any change in his expression. Yuan Ji was even more furious. He felt he had lost face in public. Qian Yuan humiliated him in public. Even a nobody dared to provoke him. It was outrageous. Ha ha. Yuan Ji no longer pretended to be kind. He grinned and sneered. It seems that after 3 years of seclusion, many people have forgotten my methods. Since someone doesn't know how to appreciate my kindness, don't blame me for being rude. All of you better remember this. Not just anyone has the qualifications to challenge this young master. With that, Yuan Ji winked at the 4 golden armored guards. The 4 golden armored guards could no longer suppress their anger and murderous intent. They immediately pulled out their swords and placed them on Ji Tianxing's neck. Kid, you're digging your own grave. Bah! You're shameless. You've angered Yuan Ji. Kneel down and beg for mercy, and you can save your life. Kneel down and beg for mercy, and I'll let you get out. The 4 golden armored protectors' faces were filled with murderous intent and ferocious expressions. However, Ji Tianxing turned a blind eye to the swords on his shoulders and in front of him. He slowly put down the wine cup and wine pot, then said with an indifferent tone, "No one has ever dared to put a sword on my neck. Because those who dared to do so are all dead." Seeing his unfathomable appearance, the spectators in the hall and the 4 golden armored guards were all stunned. Even Yuan Ji was stunned for a moment. He stared at Ji Tianxing with his eyes wide open. Everyone thought that Ji Tianxing would counterattack on the spot, and blood would splatter everywhere. However, after 2 breaths of time, nothing happened. The 4 golden armored protectors came back to their senses and laughed contemptuously. Ha ha! You little bastard, who are you trying to scare? You're pretty good at pretending, kid. Fight me if you have the guts. Kid, you're pretty good at bragging. I just don't know if your head is hard enough to withstand this seat saber. The audience in the hall also came to their senses and roared with laughter. Yuan Ji laughed contemptuously. He looked at Ji Tianxing with eyes full of sarcasm. I thought I met a great person, but I didn't expect you to be a lunatic. All right, I'm in a good mood today and can't be bothered to argue with you. Get out of here. As he spoke, Yuan Ji waved his hand disdainfully and shooed Ji Tianxing away. Ji Tianxing wasn't angry. He stared at Yuan Ji and suddenly revealed a playful smile. You've obtained the right to enter the Fortune Divine Palace and will be baptized by the Divine Light in 3 days? Yuan Ji was stunned for a moment, but then he waved his fan proudly and said with a smile, Of course. Only an elite genius like me has the right to enter. A lowly alien like you has no hope in your life, so don't even think about it. Sigh. I'm too kind. Why would I talk so much to an ant like you? Ji Tianxing took a deep look at him. The corners of his mouth curled into a sneer as he muttered, "Very good, it's you." Yuan Ji was confused. He frowned and asked, "What nonsense are you talking about, you lowly peasant?" Ji Tianxing didn't pay any more attention to him. He stood up and left the hall, quickly disappearing into the crowd on the street. Yuan Ji and the audience in the hall couldn't help but laugh and talk contemptuously for a while. But soon, everyone threw this matter to the back of their minds. He was just a lunatic. No one would take him seriously. Bookhouse reading website, that you're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.